able-bodied, light-skinned, or cisgender. To its detractors, the movement looks like narcissism in the extreme. Its main currency is selfies, often accompanied by captions that make explicit reference to the fact the poster thinks they're looking great. As one man wrote in an angry Reddit thread, all this love yourself and body positivity bullshit is turning young women into hopeless egomaniacs. But there's an important distinction to be made. As Levy explained when he first laid out the parameters of pathological narcissism, it's a disorder premised on manipulation of and competition with others. Online, people are increasingly doing the exact opposite. Body positivity might begin with selfies, but it's a movement based on mutual support and community building. As Jess Baker wrote in Things No One Will Tell Fat Girls, there is power in community, and there is power in numbers. If we support each other on our journeys, the sky's the limit. Call it a positive manifestation of narcissism, and even the most radical voices might recoil. The term has simply become too loaded, but the command is the same: learn to love thy selfie. This is a good motto by which to live, both for young people growing up online, as well as those old enough to remember that humble bragging existed long before social media. While you're listening, I wanted to let you know that our latest book, The Kinfolk Garden, is available worldwide from October 27th. But as a listener to this podcast, you can get an exclusive 10% discount on pre-orders and free shipping if you use the code PODCAST, that's just the word podcast, at the checkout on kinfolk.com. That was On Narcissism, written and read by me, Harriet Pitch-Little. Last year, we returned to the question of self-image in the short essay On Self-Mythology, in which we explored how the way we perceive ourselves is shaped by archetypes of Greek mythology other than Narcissus. It was written by Rima Sabina Ayouf and appeared in issue 32. Myths are more than stories. In the late 19th century, some psychologists used mythology as a lens into our psyches. Influenced by Carl Jung's theories of the collective unconscious, they believed that archetypal characters and motifs recurred in cultures around the world and were also present in the minds of people who had no memory of reading them. In this framework, the man who grew from feuding with his siblings to butting heads with colleagues was drawing fuel from Ares, the Greek god of war. The woman who had a prosaic desk job but measured her life in foreign discoveries and romances was mimicking the adventurer Hermes. The analysts argued that understanding the archetypes people had subconsciously chosen to emulate could help make sense of their life choices. The pantheon of mythology offers up tricksters, teachers, protectors, and pleasure seekers, united by just one common trait. They're all heroes. Few idolize the sidekick or the villain, and almost nobody casts themselves as either one. But it's not solipsism that leads us to place ourselves at the center of the tale. Acting out the role of hero in our own lives is a form of subconscious storytelling that we all do naturally. We reflect on our history and pull its scattered milestones into paths that explain how we got here. But just because we have to be the hero, it doesn't mean we have to be the hero. In his 1949 book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, scholar Joseph Campbell argued that nearly every hero, across time and place, is a version of the same monomyth. Campbell distilled the hero's journey into 3 sentences that have been highly influential. He wrote, "A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. A hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man." Superficially, this hero presents a romantic and empowering ideal. But they are also alone and separate. Their specialness is inherent to them and not owed to circumstances. We assume, but have no way of actually judging, that the hero is on the side of good. If this is the hero image our subconscious is dredging up, then maybe our conscious mind should interject. Apart from all else, if part of us thinks we're on this hero's journey, how can we not go into crisis when we get literally any other ending besides victory? So, go ahead and be the hero, but be one armed with context, acknowledge your privileges, and recognize all the people who enrich your life. Prepare to play the servant occasionally. Be open to any diversions, all denouements, and look critically at your narrative from time to time. It's immensely valuable to think about the story you're telling yourself about yourself, says Charlotte Fox Faber, head of psychotherapy at the School of Life in London. When we can reauthor our own experiences, including challenging and re-scripting certain fossilized stories we've been carrying around, something shifts in our perception. It can be utterly transformative to review and adjust our stories. I like taking people to the past if it can be purposeful. Going to the past and simply staying there, stuck, is no good. Just as anticipating and dwelling in the yet-to-exist future avoids reality and tends to be full of fantasy or anxiety. As for that push-pull between bolstering the self and serving the greater good, It might be a hurdle to embrace rather than obliterate. I love the tension between the individual and groups and the sense of purpose and efficacy that can come from the collective, says Weber. Something can get lost in the emphasis on one person's brand rather than thinking about working together, connecting, and building and playing on strengths. You've been listening to a recording from Kinfolk, read by Harriet Fitch-Little and produced by John Burns and Staffan Sundström. Our music was composed by Ville Cabral. You can listen to more recordings on kinfolk.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Coming up next on the Jordan Harbinger Show.
I was just reading Scientific America on the plane the other day, and they had a fascinating study where they were trying to figure out, what's up with these science deniers. So number one, I don't believe there's any such thing as a science denier. I've never met anybody who thought science was a bad idea. There are people who looked at the same stuff and came to different conclusions. And if you don't like the conclusion that they came to, doesn't agree with the majority, you got a problem. But here's a study in Scientific America that tells you that the number of times we're looking at exactly the same information, there's no data difference. We're smart, we're looking at it, and we just come to different conclusions.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jordan Harbinger. On the Jordan Harbinger Show, we decode the stories, secrets, and skills of the world's most fascinating people. We've got in-depth conversations with people at the top of their game. Spies, psychologists, astronauts, and entrepreneurs, even the occasional four-star general national security advisor or money laundering expert. Each episode turns our guests' wisdom into practical advice that you can use to build a deeper understanding of how the world works and become a better critical thinker. If you're new to the show or you're looking for a handy way to tell your friends about it, we've got episode starter packs. These are collections of favorite episodes organized by popular topics that'll help new listeners get a taste of everything that we do here on the show. Just visit jordanharbinger.com/start to get started or to help somebody else get started. Of course, I always love it when you share the show with your friends and or enemies. It's all the same to me. Today, we're talking with Scott Adams. He's been on the show before. This is one from the vault, yet another controversial episode because apparently I like getting hate mail. But I highly recommend that people separate their feelings from the subject matter on this one, especially the examples, and just learn. We're talking about persuasion and Donald Trump. And if you hate Trump, that's fine. You might be sick of it, move to a different episode. But you can still learn some persuasion from this episode and this discussion. I didn't want to spend too much time in this episode challenging aspects of the work with which I disagreed. In other words, parts of the book with which I disagree, because I really didn't think that would be as useful as the practical parts from which we can learn. So this was a bit of a tough editorial choice for us here, but I think it was the right one in the end because the final product here is much more useful to you as a listener. Now, on this episode, we're discussing the persuasion tactics as used by Donald Trump during and before the 2016 election, and whether or not you think that those exist or they're real, or whether or not persuasion itself is real or fabricated. Of course, it covers the 2020 election as well, especially when it comes to the types of skills that we discussed today. It doesn't matter whether you think it's real or not. Either way, after this episode, you'll start to look at interactions and things you see on TV and things you see with politicians and executives in a totally different way. And you'll also learn what types of things you can use to identify cognitive dissonance in yourself, how to know if we're being persuaded effectively and persuading effectively, and how to persuade others effectively as well. Again, divorce yourself from the subject matter examples and try to keep an open mind here. And if you're wondering how I managed to book all these amazing people for the show, it's because of my network, and I'm teaching you how to build your network for free. Dig in the well before you get thirsty over at jordanharbinger.com/course. And most of the guests that you hear on the show, I've met through the course. They subscribe to the course. They contribute to the course. Come join us. You'll be in smart company where you belong. Now, here's Scott Adams. 1 to 10, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much flack have you gotten since Trump got elected? Because before, when you were predicting the Trump thing, it was a dumpster fire, your Twitter feed. And then afterwards, I would imagine there's some sense of, okay, you were right, but most of that's probably more like, F you, I don't care that you were right.
Well, a tremendous amount of the Twitter traffic were apparently professional trolls, because the moment he got elected, they just all went away. It seems like they would have stayed around a little bit if they were just normal people to say, well, we'll see what you've done and that sort of thing. But yeah, I would say it went down 80% after election, at least on Twitter. But in terms of the impact on my life, I would say my number of friends is probably down 75%.
It's a lot.
Since I started writing about it.
So that you're down to one friend now.
I just one friend, and he's on the watch list right now.
Yeah, right. I've noticed that a lot of people have mentioned that they've lost friends because of the political situation, and I think that's kind of a shame. I've got plenty of friends on both sides of the camp. They're probably not people I would want to have over at the same time, all of them. Some of them would be totally fine. There's only a few in each camp that I think are completely insufferable when they start talking about politics. And this has been a particularly divisive election, particularly divisive administration in general. One thing that your book, Win Bigly, focuses on is the persuasion aspect of Donald Trump specifically. But during the show, I would love, if possible, it probably isn't, but I'm going to try anyway, to divorce the persuasion concepts from the man himself, because I don't want people to go, this is about Trump, click, right? I want people to go, okay, maybe I hate Trump or maybe I love him, but in the meantime, I'm going to learn something about persuasion. I learned a lot from the book, devoured it in one plane ride, and went away thinking, okay, I'm not really qualified to say whether this is all accurate or not, but it's certainly interesting. You did mention your career and your income took a huge nosedive, maybe?
Took a hit.
Yeah, severe hit. What now? I guess now you write a book and then you try to make up for this little stop loss here.
Yeah, I don't think the book will make up for the annihilation of my speaking career. I lost a big corporate license deal and probably will never get another licensing deal for Dilbert going forward because of writing about the election, yes.
Poor Dilbert.
So far, the comic itself is fine because newspapers are a little bit immune to the left-right battle. They try to serve both. So I'm fine in newspapers, but that's the only solid place.
Really? It seems strange to me that someone would go, hey, we were going to put your cartoon on a mug, but now we just can't do it because it reminds us too much of the president.
Yeah, there's some people who just can't shake that association.
Wow. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do? Would you do it exactly as you had, or would you maybe sell the Dilbert stuff to a trust or something like that, or move some IP around, or maybe you'd be Adam Scott on Twitter instead of Scott Adams?
You know, I think I'm actually attracted to trouble. It's sort of a lifetime problem with me. You know, I think, well, what's the most dangerous thing I could do? And then I think, well, that sounds good. You know, usually I talk myself out of it. In this case, I probably would have talked myself into it again. I did enjoy, I guess, the fight of it, you know, the intellectual fight of it. But there was something bigger, I thought, happening during the election. I thought that it would change how people thought about their place in the world. To me, it seemed like a far bigger thing than just, you know, one person's persuasion.
Sure. Because when I think dangerous, I think cartoonist. Right?
Well, you know, cartoonists do get killed.
Oh, actually, you know what? That's very true, especially in the last few years.
Yeah, the Charlie Hebdo guys.
Yeah, and what was the other one? The Draw Muhammad contest? Was that a filmmaker?
Filmmaker, yeah.
Yeah. Adjacent artists in general. Now it's not as safe as it was before. You say that you're in no political camp and you're more of an observer. It's hard to say that when you read the book because it is about the president's persuasive power. So a lot of folks might really not believe that. But to those folks, I kind of want to say it doesn't really matter whether or not that's true, in my opinion. Looking at persuasion as a skill set, it kind of doesn't matter who we're learning from if that person is effective. There's probably no persuasion class anywhere, rhetoric class especially, anywhere on the planet that doesn't say, all right, we don't condone this, but here's a bunch of Hitler speeches, and these were undoubtedly effective for negative results. And I think to omit that kind of case study is to just kind of plug our ears and sing la 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 and hope that it goes away.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are effective people that we don't like. And if you're just looking at the tools and you can hold your nose and say, what can I learn? Then you can learn.
You mentioned that when you're a member of a group, you'll find their views more sympathetic. So, of course, I have to ask you, is the book then a reflection of, well, you know, secretly I am a Trump supporter, so of course all of these things look like persuasion because they worked on me?
Well, I describe myself politically as left of Bernie, except with a preference for things that might actually work. In other words, philosophically, I want, you know, free education, free healthcare, and all those things. I don't know how to get there, but I think maybe America could, you know, at least have a plan to get there eventually. So politically, I'm not on the Republican side, but in terms of the first word you used was, you know, in their camp. But as soon as you said that, I thought to myself, well, I am sort of in their camp because I do represent a point of view which they like. I do appreciate that group because they're the ones who supported me for 2 years, whereas the other group attacked me viciously for 2 years. So I have a strong preference for the people, which is different than the policies or the politician.
I think that it is interesting that we find that when someone strongly disagrees with a certain side's perspectives, people then go, I don't like that you're even saying that this is a possibility, therefore I'm going to attack you. Because it seemed to me always a little bit nonsensical to come after somebody who says, I'm predicting a Trump win for better or for worse. Or somebody who's maybe in Silicon Valley would say things like, don't keep talking about Trump, you're going to get him elected. Nobody went to that guy and said, you shut up, we'll talk about whatever we want. They all went, oh, okay, that's a good idea. And I had the same problem on this show when I interviewed Roger Stone. People went, I'm unsubscribing because he shouldn't be allowed to talk. And I thought, who made these decisions about who I'm allowed to talk to or about? And I think that's a weird problem that you have faced more than anybody.
Let me bail you out. Let's talk about Colin Kaepernick's persuasion, because I'm a big Kaepernick fan. So when I say fan, it has nothing to do with football. It doesn't even have anything to do with the specific policies he's pushing, although that topic is important, of course. But persuasion-wise, was. Colin Kaepernick nailed it. He raised consciousness. The entire country is talking about the thing that he started. He stayed within the law. He didn't break any laws. He offended our sensibilities in exactly the right way for a protest. My image of the America that I want to live in is that, I don't want a flag that I'm not allowed to burn. Like, that's not a flag that has the same value to me. I'm offended when somebody burns it because it's just an emotional reaction. But I don't want to live in a country that has a flag I can't burn. Colin Kaepernick, I think, persuasion-wise, is like the Nobel Prize of persuasion. The entire country is talking about his thing. He broke no law. He hurt no people. And he had skin in the game. That's as good as it gets.
Yeah, that's true, right? He's not in jail. Well, I don't know if he got a fine from the owners. It's hard to say. But if he did, it's going to be a drop in the bucket compared to whatever next contract he's going to end up with or the one he already has.
Well, he doesn't have a contract now. So
does he? Oh, well, I guess I don't know. That shows you, one, how much I follow sports versus other items on the agenda. What do you think is going to happen in this situation?
I think he suffered quite a bit. I mean, the huge portion of the country will never forgive him.
Oh, that's true.
And that just will never go away. I don't think there's anything he can do to fix that. I've just gave him big props for persuasion. So maybe he has more game than we know. But at this moment, I'd say he put his skin in the game for something he cared about. And it's going to cost him forever, probably.
Do you think that it's politically, and I mean that in the broadest sense of the word, beneficial to then alienate certain people like he has done, while then, of course, using that same platform to draw many, many people that much closer to him? For example, I didn't care about this at all. He was a name on a jersey and nothing more. Now he's been elevated a few tiers up as somebody who's an influencer in a way that actually matters. There are plenty of people who say, I'm not watching football anymore and screw this guy. It's almost a worthwhile trade-off, in my opinion, but I'm wondering what you think about that sort of.
Well, it's certainly worthwhile in the sense that he raised the issue that he wanted to raise, and he took the bullet. He knew that this was going to cost him, and he did it anyway. So that I have to respect.
Is that where you kind of fell on the Trump prediction scale as well? It sounds easy to say, and that's why I wrote about Trump on my blog. And it's like, people are going to go, this guy wrote about Trump on a blog. The other guy took a knee in front of the whole country.
Well, no, I certainly would never compare myself to any of those individuals. I took some risk with what I was doing, but I did think, and I still think, that if you look at the way people talk about the election, the word persuasion is now common. You didn't see that in other elections. You see people referring to a phrase that I'm credited online for being the first to say, which is this 3D, 4D chess analogy. So it's become common to think that the way the president operates is through a persuasion filter, and he's got some technique there. It's not just all random. And that's what I wanted people to know. I wanted to it wasn't about Trump so much as opening a hole in the universe to look through to a deeper truth. The main thing I always talk about is the two movies on one screen. The number of times we're looking at exactly the same information. There's no data difference. We're smart, we're looking at it, and we just come to different conclusions. I was just reading Scientific America on the plane the other day, and they had a fascinating study where they were trying to figure out, what's up with these science deniers. So number one, I don't believe there's any such thing as a science denier. I've never met anybody who thought science was a bad idea. There are people who looked at the same stuff and came to different conclusions. And if you don't like the conclusion that they came to, doesn't agree with the majority, you got a problem. But here's a study in Scientific America that tells you the two movies on one screen vividly. They wanted to find out if denying science had something to do with simply not understanding science. The first thing you would test is, well, is it just the dumb people? And sure enough, they would find that there were plenty of dumb people who disagreed with the scientists. But they also found that across the entire knowledge scale, to the most knowledgeable about science, no facts change their minds. In other words, the data was never part of the decision to begin with. The fact that some people are saying no and some people are saying yes is almost certainly because they align with the political side. At least in most cases, there have to be some independent minds there somewhere. But in general, people just vote their side and then they figure out why they did it after the fact.
I could not agree more. When we had Shaquille O'Neal on the show, he mentioned that he was just joking when he said that the earth was flat. And I got a lot of email, mostly tweets, because you know how they go on Twitter, saying, no, the earth really is flat. This is the Freemasons are forcing him to say that he was joking because this, that, and the other thing. And every single person that I engaged with, because I was genuinely curious, there are really flat earthers out there. I want to know what these people are about. Universally, they were religious and they were part of a certain church that said the earth is flat and there's the firmament and that's what the angels live above that. All of the other, and I throw this in air quotes, science, then somehow has to be squeezed into that sort of perspective. And that sort of perspective says, no, above the sky is the firmament and above the firmament is heaven. Everything else has to fall into that.
Well, I think I found my new religion because I like to keep it simple.
Yeah, there you go.
Earth is flat, angels up there, done.
Yeah, angels up there, bad stuff down there. Just don't dig too far and we're good to go. Yeah. Let's talk about the types of persuader. You go through that early in the book, Win Bigly. What are the different types of persuaders? What are we dealing with on a daily basis?
So I tried to help people figure out the different powers that different persuaders have. And so it seemed to me that I'm what I call a commercial persuader. And by that, I mean, I use persuasion for my job. It's part of how I write. It's part of how I make cartoons. It's part of how I write books. And so I'm a commercial grade persuader. Above me would be cognitive scientists, people who actually study this for a living. As I say in Win Bigly, if a cognitive scientist says, hey, this chapter is wrong, believe the scientist, not me. I'm commercial grade, they're science grade. And then above that, I put what I call the master persuaders. These are people who have all the tools of persuasion, but they bring something else. They either a high risk appetite, or there's something about their personality that's just gigantic. In this case, Trump has both. So there are people like Steve Jobs, for example, where there's something about his willpower, his, again, appetite for risk, and other things that just normal people don't have, but they're above and beyond the tools of persuasion. But you put them together and they're insanely powerful.
So the things that we see master persuaders do are maybe not yet explained by science then? Is that what you're saying? Or are there things that scientists have not studied since they're a rung above on the ladder?
So no, I don't think it's so much a case that science hasn't discovered what master persuaders can do. An example would be a master persuader says something that they know is not true, and they're going to take a lot of flack for it. But in the meantime, they're going to get attention for something that they want attention for. Ordinary people can't do that because they say, I'm not going to go in public and say something that I know isn't true. But a master persuader, sometimes they say, well, it's for a greater good, perhaps, we hope. So I'll shade this. I'll use a little hyperbole. Doesn't really matter in the long run. What matters is where we're heading, and I think that's a good place to go. There's something about the personality that's able to do what other people would say, I just can't do that.
Right. So it's almost, like you said, a high appetite for risk and or something that makes them almost immune to the social consequences, or ignorant in a way that makes them just not care at all.
Yeah, immune to shame
Yes.
is a big deal.
Yeah.
So if you look at my arc, transitioning from cartoonist to guy who was writing about persuasion and stuff, that was a risky transition. And we see the risk in all the friction it caused, the cost to my main business, the attacks that I got online and everything. But I'm at a point in my life where I like the risk, and I'm almost immune to shame. It is a learned skill to be immune to other people's opinions and just sort of brush it off and move on.
Well, let's talk about that. How do we learn that skill? Because there are plenty of people that have nothing to be ashamed of, but do have unpopular views that would love to know how they make that happen.
Number one way is to be embarrassed a whole bunch of times and then look back a month later and say, oh, my day today is exactly like it would have been if that had never happened.
Right. The real life consequences were I was embarrassed temporarily and nothing more.
Yeah, I took the Dale Carnegie course. I may have mentioned that last time we talked. A small part of the course is they actually have you embarrass yourself intentionally in front of the class. But I found that really, really helpful. Even helps with things like public speaking, because you're thinking, oh, what's everybody thinking of me? The Dale Carnegie course just lets you just let go and just act natural. And that's the safest thing you can do. So it's the worrying that causes the problem. You think, well, I better worry about this because this is a potential problem. But the only problem was the worrying. Once you get rid of that, it solves itself.
So essentially we can go back and maybe journal sometimes what we felt really embarrassed and then examine the lasting consequences thereof.
Well, yeah, it's an ongoing process. And one of the things I've got going for me is that I'm old, right? So I'm 60.
I didn't notice.
So the number of times that you've been embarrassed presumably is far fewer than the number of times I have.
Especially recently, you've been racking them up, I see online, I think, whether you've done so intentionally or not. And I think a lot of people have it out for you, and this is probably not going to help. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, I think my popularity will plunge to a new low. But with books, people buy books to hear their own opinion expressed better, right? At least political books. Now, this particular book, my book, has information in it about persuasion. So, but still, people are going to say, well, you're talking about this topic and I'm on the other side, so I'm not even going to listen to the persuasion. So what I expect is it will be a polarizing book, but it may not be bad for sales, because you're better off exciting a small group of people who actually act than to be pretty good to a bunch of people. That's the Hollywood model. The Hollywood model is if you're testing a pilot for a show and everybody who's in the test audience says, yeah, that's good. I'd watch that show. That's pretty good. That means nothing. You want 10% of those people to walk out and say, good Lord, this is the best show I've ever seen. Tell me when this is on. Can I get a copy of the tape? So you need excitement from a small number that predicts success better than a lot of people saying, yeah, that's pretty good.
You're listening to The Jordan Harbinger Show with our guest, Scott Adams. We'll be right back. This episode is sponsored in part by SimpliSafe. When SimpliSafe Home Security's founders, Chad and Eleanor Lawrence, designed their first security system in their kitchen, they did it for a very personal reason. Their friends had just had their home broken into, and I know how that feels. It sucks. They were struggling to find a security system that was simple to set up and would make them feel safe again. Making people feel safe is what SimpliSafe has been doing ever since that moment 15 years ago. A passion to protect people not only drives every engineering detail in the product, but it motivates every interaction with its customers. SimpliSafe has highly trained security experts ready whenever you need them, whether that's during a fire, burglary, medical emergency, or even when you're setting up a system. I can just imagine people just calling to just to chat to somebody. Hit the lonely button on your SimpliSafe. There's always someone there who has your back to keep you safe and make sure you feel safe.
As our listener, you can save 20% on your SimpliSafe security system and get your first month free when you sign up for interactive monitoring service. Just visit simplysafe.com/Jordan to customize your system and start protecting your home and family today. Again, that's simplysafe.com/Jordan.
This episode is also sponsored by Everlane. It's been perfect weather for enjoying some shaved ice, some iced coffee, wearing a classic t-shirt. Some of the greatest pleasures in life are also the simplest. That's why Everlane makes premium quality essentials that complement every wardrobe at a more transparent, affordable price. Everlane's got everything from workout to takeout, swimwear to trackwear, styles for lounging at home or hitting up your favorite late night spot. On the hunt for the perfect denim, Everlane's got skinny to relaxed, slim to athletic fit. Choose your stretch level, vintage style rigid, original with just a hint, or body hugging authentic stretch, which I will not do to you or to myself. All made from certified organic cotton at the world's cleanest denim factory with zero landfill waste, which is kind of amazing, actually. I'm a fan of the organic cotton V-neck tee, an essential in every closet. I love the softness and how it keeps shape through washes, and heavy enough not to show any skin or, like my nips or anything. Perfect worn alone or as an undershirt.
Go to everlane.com/Jordan and sign up for 10% off your first order plus free shipping and get easy returns within 30 days of your ship date. That's 10% off your first order when you go to everlane.com/Jordan and sign up.
Now back to Scott Adams on the Jordan Harbinger Show. This will certainly polarize a lot of people. I think people who support the current administration are going to go, yeah, this is amazing. I never noticed all this stuff. It's so enlightening. Now I got to go rewatch all this video. I'm going to be looking at him differently. I will say that even now, having read this and not necessarily by any stretch falling into one of the mainstream political camps, that I'll give you this, it's become a lot more interesting to watch the president speak, because now I can look for the persuasion things instead of just saying, oh, what fresh hell is this now with the climate thing or whatever. And I wish that we had a book about this for pretty much anybody that we had to watch that we didn't necessarily like for the next period of several years. And I will say also that the examples in the book, they're going to ruffle some feathers. I think some of your best media that's going to sell a lot of this book are going to be people that just skewer the crap out of it, whether they do a good job at that or not. I think you're going to have a lot of rebuttal pieces from some of those reviews online, and you should just warm up that keyboard and have a replacement ready, because you're going to be doing a lot of typing, I think.
It's going to be really challenging for reviewers, I think. I think they're going to have a tough time for it, for the same reason the public will. They're going to try to separate the politics and their view of things from the actual book. I'm going on the Morning Joe show when I do my tour.
They're starting at an expert level.
I'm going into the Lion's Den. I can't wait. That'll be fun.
Yeah, that should be interesting. I often wonder, though, how many journalists that interview you read the stuff that you put out before they do the interview, or if they just get 5 bullet points from an intern and then try to wing it.
Well, in the case of a book, it's actually rare for somebody to read the book. So you're actually in rare territory, having consumed it before I got here. I would say no more than 1 in 8 or 10, maybe.
It seems like that would be a huge advantage if you want to debate somebody about a book that they've written, that you might want to go ahead and read it first, or at least part of it.
Well, it certainly gives me some freedom.
Yeah.
It's like, as I said in the book, well, you wouldn't know that.
Yeah, exactly. All right. People don't use facts to make decisions. That was one of the major points in the book. Tell us why that's true, because a lot of people go, nope, all my decisions are fact-based and I am empirical, and that's what's good about my decisions, is they're all based on fact.
Yeah, everybody thinks that. I think there was a recent study, I wish I could quote it, but something like 98% of people just won't change no matter what facts you give them on politics. People will change on things they don't care about. So if you were to imagine this on a graph, the more they cared about it, the less likely they're going to change, which seems backwards, right? The more emotion, the more likely their mental processes are short-circuited.
Right, because of all the fallacies, confirmation bias, sunk cost fallacy, there's a lot of emotional investment in anything that you feel strongly about. By definition, you're investing more and more emotion in that, which would make you more and more wrong in the past if you change your mind moving forward, which is why we see as remarkable people who do things like leave the Amish and join the rest of the world. We find that amazing. Or somebody that shakes off severe issues growing up in the middle of rural Africa or something like that and becomes some sort of tech entrepreneur. Those stories are amazing because of the amount of investment that somebody has in a certain way of life or a certain set of thoughts, religion or otherwise.
Let me give you a little example that's a current one. So after the Vegas shooting, there was lots of talk about the security guard, Jesus Campos, and where was he? And a lot of people came up with conspiracy theories. And they were so sure their conspiracy theory was right, that this security guard must have been somehow connected with the shooter, that when they produced the actual picture of him, and then people compared it to, I guess, an older picture, which they knew was actually him, and they said, they put him side by side on Twitter, and they said, clearly not the same guy. They replaced him with a body double. And I looked at the pictures. I don't buy into the conspiracy theories, and therefore I have no emotional investment. I simply didn't think that was the thing. I look at those pictures, and I think, that's exactly the same guy. It could not be more obvious. I'm looking at them, 2 pictures next to each other, clearly the same guy. But other people, honest, smart, completely normal people who can hold jobs looked at those pictures and said, oh my God, one on the left is a whole different person. And when you see it that starkly, you're actually standing in the room with somebody who's looking at the same simple thing and they're seeing it differently. It's amazing. It just tells you how powerful this is. And that was only with just a little bit of mental investment in their prior opinion, and they still couldn't shake it. With a photograph, it could not have been clearer, in my opinion.
You think we're evolved to see that way? We actually had a brain scientist on the show earlier, and I can't remember which brain scientist it was, but she was saying that one of the things they're studying right now are a lot of these police shootings, and they're thinking that the police are actually seeing dangerous weapons because their brain is painting a completely different picture. And she thinks that with more advanced brain imaging in the next 10, 20 years, we're going to be able to see that people who make grave mistakes like that, based on negative stereotypes, maybe of the race or ethnicity of the person that they're involved with, they're actually seeing something completely different than we're seeing on a video, which is why it looks so bad on the video, because we look and we say, how did you think that guy was armed and running towards you when he was unarmed and running away from you? If we one day get to the day where we can replay what they saw in their brain, somehow we'll see exactly what they said, which is he was running towards me and he had a gun in his hand.
You've probably seen the famous video of the people passing the ball around, and then the monkey joins the circle.
But yeah, this guy in a gorilla suit or something walks by slowly.
He actually joins the circle for a moment.
Oh, really?
And because you've been asked to count the number of passes that they pass back and forth, people don't see a man in a gorilla suit joining a small group of, 5 people in a circle. After they tell you, and then you watch it, you think, I was blind to a giant monkey on screen, and I didn't even see it.
I thought it was a fake video where it played twice, and one had the bear or the monkey or the gorilla, whatever it was, and one didn't. So I actually rewound it and rewatched it. And then I reloaded it from an incognito tab in Chrome thinking, oh, it knows that I'm back, because there's no way that I missed this. If you show it to somebody who's not aware of what the test is testing, you will find that they miss it almost 100% of the time.
I was once a bank teller here in San Francisco, and I got robbed at gunpoint.
During the middle of the day?
During the middle of the day.
So it was a bank robbery.
Bank robbery, which actually is very common. Most of the local branches get robbed on a regular basis, but you don't even know it if you're in the lobby of the bank. It's usually just a quiet transaction. Give me your money. They do. This guy leaves. Of course, the FBI and police or whoever it is comes by and they say, give us a description. So I described him. And keep in mind, he was right in front of me. He was at my window, the bank teller window, and I had a good look at him, right? And I said, oh, yeah, he's about my size. He was about 5'8", and he had salt and pepper hair, and he was sort of bald, and, he hadn't shaved for a while, and he had a long trench coat. And I had a really good image. In fact, I still have it in my head, a perfect image of that guy. I get a call from my boss, and he goes, they're wondering if you really pulled the secret alarm. Well, it tells you where the camera is supposed to be looking, at what point they're supposed to be looking. And they said they can't find that guy on the video when they play it back. So I actually went to the top secret FBI headquarters, the place that they look at the tapes. And they said, is this guy in the tape the guy who robbed you? And I said, no, that's not even close. The guy in the tape, he looked like 35, like a young Clint Eastwood with this big bushy brown mustache, full head of hair, and a sport jacket. Could not have been further from the guy that I clearly saw. Then they played it backwards in slow motion, and I watched that complete stranger rob me. So there was no ambiguity when you saw it on tape. He actually was robbing me. But my memory was an entirely different person. And, the FBI said, yeah, don't even worry. That's actually kind of normal.
Who did you think that robbed you? I mean, did you pick that guy out of a movie? Was it just somewhere stored in the memory banks from a TV show you saw as a kid?
Who knows? Because, you're under duress, and then your brain just doesn't act normally. You convince yourself you saw something you didn't see.
Right. When you're trying to theoretically fight or flight, your brain's not saying, it's going to be important for you to remember exactly what this person looks like for later. Your brain's thinking, how do I get out of here without getting shot in the head by this crazy person?
And then there was a second time I got robbed, he actually put the gun up to my nose. So actually took out a gun and held it right up to my face and said he would shoot me if I didn't give him money, which is really scary because you're pulling the silent alarm while you're looking down the barrel of the gun.
Right.
And he knows it. It's a really scary situation. I was dumb to have even pulled the alarm. I should have just given him my own wallet and said, hey, take what you can. But I gave him the money, and eventually I got asked to be part of a lineup, picking a guy out of a lineup. And I recognized him immediately, but he was also the only one smiling. And the other people in the room, because he'd robbed several banks,
right.
Several witnesses, we all picked the same guy. And I always wondered after that day, was it because he was the only one smiling? He was going out of his way to look like he wasn't worried. The others were actors, so they were trying to act like a guilty guy, and he's the only one who wasn't. So I always wondered, did I really recognize him, or did that cue me that he must be the guy?
So if you're in a lineup, try to just look like everybody else in the lineup. Don't try to look like you're relaxed.
I'm hoping to avoid that lineup situation.
Yeah, right. So why is this concept important that humans use emotion instead of facts to make decisions?
So I call this the hypnotist's point of view. So I'm a trained hypnotist. One of the things that you sort of have to believe in order to even do hypnosis and understand it and work with it is that people are irrational about 90% of the time. 10% of the time on the little stuff they don't care about, they can do fine. But the common view of the world is exactly the opposite of that. The common view is that we are rational 90% of the time, and about 10% of the time we get emotional and things go crazy. If you use those two filters on life and say, okay, which one is explaining things better? The irrational filter just wins every time. That doesn't mean it's true, because we may live in a universe where we're just fooled about everything. Who knows? But certainly as a filter to predict things, it's very true. Just like the fact that people can look at the same data with the same IQ, same background, and just see different things. Actually, literally see different things like we were just talking. That's completely irrational behavior, and it's the norm. It's not the exception.
One of the concepts in Win Bigly is that things we think about all the time rise a couple of rungs up on the ladder of importance in our mind. You gave a lot of really interesting examples of this and the way that Trump uses these examples to persuade. Can we explain and give some examples of this? Because that explains a lot of why these facts and assertions and things like that come out of his mouth seemingly for no reason. And a lot of us just smack our foreheads and think, you didn't Google this before you got up on a podium in front of the media?
So I'll quote Dr. Carmen Simon, expert on memory. She teaches and writes about the fact that if you don't have a little bit of wrongness, people won't remember it. So if everything looks the same, your brain just falls asleep and say, yeah, blah, 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 more of that. Your brain can't remember everything, right? It's very selective. And so there's something about President Trump's natural style, which I think he has intentionally elevated for these purposes, that everything seems to violate something that you didn't think should have been violated. He either acts in a way that you say, no president should act that way, or he states something that you think that couldn't possibly be true. He uses a word that shouldn't be used in that context. There's just something about it that's not normal. And he does that so consistently, it would be hard to think that that's completely accidental. Although I do imagine there are plenty of times where there's a small error and he just doesn't care. So some of it is not caring to make it exactly as people expect. But the net effect of it is you can't turn away. If you tweet something, you just say, oh, that's more interesting than whatever else I was doing. Let's talk about that. And then it becomes part of your brain's architecture.
How can we use this concept in our own lives if we're not the president of the free world here? What do we do in our daily lives to maybe capitalize on the fact that, look, I want people to think this is important. How do I get it wrong, but not so wrong I lose credibility?
There must be infinite ways to do something slightly wrong. So I guess it would depend on the specific situation. If you're using hyperbole, let's use the classic example. Let's say, well, for example, in this interview, I'm happy to see that at least 50 or 60 people have showed up in the audience to watch us. I'm really happy.
Million and a half. Yeah.
If that ever gets fact checked and we find out it's two.
They're both my parents.
Yeah.
That would be, it's a little too far-fetched.
Who's going to believe that
Yeah.
anyway? But by the time somebody finds out that that fact was an exaggeration, they still have it in their head and they've lived with, well, I guess there were a lot of people at that thing. And even the corrected information just doesn't have as much impact as the original thought. We don't like to change our mind that much.
People think, why would he say that? Of course he's going to get caught on that. And what you're saying is, yeah, but it doesn't matter if he gets caught on that because the effect happens in the moment. It doesn't matter that later on down the line, it doesn't look accurate.
Well, he also uses the trick where he makes you, think past the sale quite a bit. So there was a recent tweet where he said something like, can't imagine the Democrats, if they voted against this, how would they live with themselves in the future? And it makes you think about, well, could they live with themselves? Would that be hard in the future? What would that be like if you didn't vote for this? That seems like an exaggeration. I think those Democrats would be fine because it's the way they voted. I'm sure they liked it. So you're talking to yourself about this future where they've got a problem and you've already thought past, did they make that vote? So he's making them think about their bad future, which is strong persuasion.
What types of things can we learn from cognitive dissonance? This is one of the things that you start the book with. It's a concept we discuss a lot on the show. Can we define it and then talk about why it makes us irrational?
The Scott's definition of cognitive dissonance, without all the science in it, is that if there's something that violates your expectations or your self-image or just the way you think the world is supposed to be, especially if it involves you, that's the biggest trigger. If there's something about you that you would have to change. For example, if you found yourself doing something stupid, but you believe you're a very smart person, instead of saying, well, I guess I was wrong, I must be stupid after all, it's far more likely to say, well, I had a good reason in this particular case, I didn't get sleep or whatever it was. Well, in that case, that might actually be the reason. So, terrible example. But the point is that we spontaneously come up with a reason why everything was fine and our original opinion was just great.
So essentially, we rationalize past opinions or behaviors in order to make them line up with pre-existing beliefs.
Yeah, but rationalizing is almost too weak because cognitive dissonance can give you a full-blown hallucination in which you're seeing stuff you don't. The example I gave of the people who saw the two photographs of the security guard, the people who were deeply invested in how brilliant they were because they had figured out this conspiracy that somehow the government had not told the people and, they're way ahead of it. If their self-image is, I could not be wrong about this. I get this sort of stuff right all all the time, and then they're clearly wrong. There's a photograph right in front of them. That might cause them to hallucinate that they see the photo differently.
So this essentially, the rationalization or the hallucination gets us kind of back to zero. If we have some evidence in our face that says you're so wrong about this, we have to kind of reset our expectations. We either have to change our entire identity, the way that we see ourselves, or we have to go, what? Those photos? That's ridiculous. That's not the same guy. And that's just an easier calculation for our brains to make. Is that what you're saying?
It's the easiest thing your brain can do is to say I was right all along instead of rework your entire history and your self-image and everything else. Let me tie this to something fun. I know I've talked about the idea that we're a simulated universe and that some creatures built us to believe we're real. The idea here, and by the way, there are credible people for your listeners who believe this.
Yeah, I think Elon Musk is one of them. Am I wrong about that?
I believe I heard that,
Yeah.
There are scientists and philosophers who think this is worth a look. And the idea is that as soon as one species is smart enough to create a simulation that also thinks it's real, they'll probably make more than one. And they might make thousands of them. Maybe it's a game that kids can do. They can all make their own civilization. So the odds are that it's very unlikely that we're an original species when there will be so many copies. So if we're a copy, then we're programmed, meaning that there's somebody who's trying to conserve resources, as all programmers do. It is unlikely that they would build a universe that had everything in it just in case somebody saw it. That would not be any way to program anything. You would only do it as needed. But here's the fun part. You would also want to make sure that every person's experience was as easy to program as possible. So if you believed that we had lunch yesterday, and I believe we didn't, and we get together when we realize we have different beliefs about this, one of us has to change. And it's much easier, instead of having us rewrite our history and all that and all the things it was connected to, for one of us to say, oh, now suddenly I'm spontaneously hallucinating that it was somebody who looked like you, and yeah, I got that confused. But none of that might be true. In a simulated universe, the programmer is just trying to reconcile the problems without creating a permanent history that's objective.
This is the Jordan Harbinger Show with our guest, Scott Adams. We'll be right back. This episode is sponsored in part by BetterHelp Online Therapy. I know what you're thinking. I don't need therapy. My friends are my therapists. Let me just tell you right now, your friends are sick of hearing about your crap. A therapist is a trained and objective professional, whereas a friend is not neutral. They have not received any training in working with mental health challenges. They're probably, like I said, kind of sick of hearing about the same crap over and over. While a friend can be a great source of social support, they are just not equipped to provide therapeutic services. Additionally, when you talk to a therapist, you have the comfort of knowing that they are bound by confidentiality standards and not going to go blab to everybody else in your group. Your friend could inadvertently or on purpose spill your beans and make matters even worse. Further, a therapist doesn't simply give you advice. Rather, an effective therapist aims to help you establish goals, help you come to your own conclusions and realizations. So therapy is also where you can be vulnerable, process emotion. So if you've been avoiding therapy because you think your friends are good enough or they can be your therapist, consider this right now your sign to make an appointment today.
Our listeners get 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/Jordan. Visit betterhelp.com/Jordan and join over 1 million people who've taken charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced BetterHelp professional.
This episode is also sponsored by Blue Moon. Blue Moon is on a mission to bring some brightness back to your life, break out that routine. From its refreshing flavor with Valencia orange peel for a subtle sweetness and hints of coriander, Blue Moon Belgian White is a one-of-a-kind beer. Blue Moon is here to break up the day-to-day and remind you of what life is like when you step out of your routine, or like out of your freaking kitchen, where I've been for the last 18 months. My parents came for a 2-week visit from Michigan to celebrate Jaden's second birthday. I took a little time off to hang with them. We enjoyed simple things like hanging out in our backyard patio, talking memories, sipping on a Blue Moon with good old dad. Those once-in-a-blue moon moments should happen more than once in a blue moon. Blue Moon is carefully crafted for a one-of-a-kind appearance and flavor. Coriander provides balance. Oats create a smooth, creamy finish. The name stuck after a satisfied taster said, a beer this good only comes around once in a blue moon, and I'm totally sure that really happened.
Reach for a Blue Moon when you're in need for some added brightness. Get Blue Moon and Light Sky delivered by visiting get.bluemoonbeer.com/Jordan to see your delivery options. That's get.bluemoonbeer.com/Jordan. Blue Moon, made brighter. Celebrate responsibly. Blue Moon Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado Ale.
This episode is also sponsored in part by Progressive. Progressive helps you get a great rate on car insurance, even if it's not with them. They have this nifty comparison tool that puts your rates side by side, so you choose a rate and coverage that work for you. Let's say you're interested in lowering your rate on car insurance. Visit Progressive.com to get a quote with all the coverage you want. You'll see Progressive's rate, and then their tool will provide options from the other guys, all lined up and easy to compare, so that all you have to do is choose the rate and coverage that you like. Progressive gives you options, so you can make the best choice for you. You could be looking forward to saving money in the very near future. More money for, say, a pair of noise-canceling headphones. Maybe you're going to upgrade your phone. I don't know. Pay for an escape room or two. Whatever brings you joy. Get a quote today at Progressive.com. It's just one small step you can do today that can make a big impact on your budget tomorrow.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. Your support of the show means the world to me. Of course, what keeps the lights on around here is when you support our sponsors. So please do consider supporting those who support us. Visit jordanharbinger.com/deals for all the codes, all those URLs, all those discounts are all in one place. jordanharbinger.com/deals. Don't forget, we've got worksheets for many episodes if you want some of the the drills, exercises, and takeaways talked about during the show, those are in one easy place in those worksheets, which are linked in the show notes at jordanharbinger.com/podcast. Now for the conclusion of my conversation with Scott Adams.
So this is kind of like all 8 levels or 8 worlds of Mario Brothers do not exist inside the TV at one time. The only thing that exists is the frames you're looking at on the screen while you're playing. And if somebody else is playing Mario Brothers at the exact same time, they're playing their own game. It doesn't have to reconcile with whatever you're doing at home in your living room with whatever they're doing at home in their living room.
Bringing that to the human example, there are people who believe they're living in a country where a Hitler-like person is taking over and everything's going to go to hell soon. And there are people who think, oh, we're on the cusp of a golden age. The stock market's up. Those are completely different movies. The fascinating thing is that until something violates one of them, until somebody sees something that you just can't explain away, the program doesn't need to reconcile them. We can just both live and procreate, and there was never any reason that we needed to reconcile them.
How do we spot cognitive dissonance and then maybe short circuit it? Is it possible?
I think the best you can do is to figure out who got triggered, at least more likely got triggered. If you'll allow me to use the election example, people who supported Trump were optimistic he would get elected. They knew lots of people who voted for him. So when he got elected, there was nothing necessarily that I can see that would have triggered any kind of cognitive dissonance. But if you were positive this monster could never be elected, and then he was, you have to rewrite your whole idea of the world you're living in. If members of those two groups disagree, it's more likely that the one who has an obvious trigger for cognitive dissonance is the one in it. That doesn't guarantee it, because I suppose you could also be invisible to your own trigger, right? The whole point of cognitive dissonance is that when you're in it, you can't see it. But maybe, and this is really speculation on my part, maybe you could find the trigger and say, well, in this case, I had a trigger or the other person had a trigger, and that might give you a hint.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I thought for sure this is going to be a trouncing of the nth degree. And then when that didn't happen, I remember waking up and going, I clearly live in a bubble where I only see people who have similar opinions to me. I need to fix that because this is so wildly wrong. I really thought it was going to be like the whole long evening, right? I thought I'm going to be in bed as soon as I'm done with dinner because it's not even going to be close. And we're going to wake up with what we all thought was going to happen.
Now, it was based on your earlier comment, the fact that you were not strongly aligned with any particular group allowed you to reinterpret your situation fairly rationally. I mean, what you just said sounds totally rational to me. It's like, oh, I just realized I was in a bubble.
Yeah, I just went, holy California, I got to travel more or something.
But you realize that 40% of the country said, Russia, it had to be Russia, or they're way more racist than we ever imagined. Yeah, so everybody came up with their own story about why they were wrong.
Yeah, the racism thing made me quite sad. There were a lot of people that said anybody who voted for this person is racist. And I just thought, like, well, I don't know if we want to run headlong down that track just yet. That seems, maybe I'm delusional again, but I really don't want to think those types of negative things about the country that we live in. I don't want to bury my head in the sand if those things are true, but I also don't want to assume that people with different political beliefs are stupid or racist or really want to see the world burn. Although some of my friends who voted for either party were certainly in that camp too. I don't want to always assume the worst about somebody who disagrees with me because I think that is a toxic mindset to have.
Yeah, and both sides do, in fact, assume the worst. I think Republicans think that people on the left are just crazy or selfish, and the left thinks they're a bunch of racists and science deniers. I'm sure that's true of the extremes on both groups, but it certainly misses 85% of both groups.
In Win Bigly, you have some tells that you talk about with rationalizations, things like looking at cognitive dissonance and saying, all right, if we have a certain rationalization that is just beyond absurd, that's a tell. And there was also different tells, the variety of tells that people have were also good indicators. Can you flesh that out for us?
My favorite one is on Twitter, you'll see somebody start the sentence with so, and then they'll misinterpret what you said as what I call a crazy absolute. It's an absurd absolute. So if you say, for example, I'm in favor of guns, then somebody will say, so you're in favor of giving a toddler a loaded gun in a crib. Great, you idiot. And you think to yourself, how could anybody have interpreted that as giving that extreme absurd absolute? But I used to think that the person who would say such a thing is just a bad debater.
Right, they just have logical fallacies they can't quite get.
Yeah, they're just saying whatever they need to say because that's the other side. I now see that as they hit cognitive dissonance because whatever I said must have erased all of their good reasons. They had to reinterpret what I said until it didn't make sense so they could still be right. And when you watch somebody reinterpret what you say as an extreme absolute, it's like every time. So look for words like, are you saying every time this happens? Are you saying that not one single time you've ever seen this? As soon as you see that, you know that they've accepted your argument. At least it makes sense to them, but they can't live in that world, so they've got to rewrite their personal history.
That sounds like me arguing with my wife. I know she's right, so I have to think of the most extreme situation situation in which she would be wrong, and that's the one I'm going to bring up in the car on the way here. And what about having lots of different explanations for the same thing? One of the tells that someone is engaged or indulging in cognitive dissonance was that there are one person explains it this way and another person explains it that way, and there's 100 different explanations, and they all kind of lead to the one conclusion.
Right. So right after the election, CNN published some long list of all the different reasons that people got it wrong and Trump actually won. And they're all different. And if you see that many different reasons for something, it means that nobody knows the reason, which means that maybe they don't want to accept the reason. That's a red flag when you see lots of different explanations and everybody's looking at the same data. That's the thing. If everybody were looking at different information, then different explanations make sense. But if they're looking at the same stuff and they have the same brains and they've got 24 different reasons to explain it, probably none of them are right.
But can't there be multiple explanations for the same phenomenon or for the same result?
Well, there are multiple variables. So you could have a situation where lots of things were 2% of the answer. But when you're trying to sell it as the reason, it would be reasonable to say, okay, well, there were a whole bunch of things and maybe this was 2% and this was 1%. Had somebody said that, I would say, oh, that's a reasonable person who is not in cognitive dissonance at all. When you look into it and there are so many different things and you say, well, the reason is sexism.
Right. Hillary ran a bad campaign and sexism and racism. Those could all be right, though, right?
Well, they could all be 1%, 2% of the problem, and they're all complicated because it could work both ways in some cases. And if anybody says the complicated version, like, well, there are many variables, we can't suss it out. What I said was that persuasion would be a better predictor, and that it did, in fact, predict a number of things along the way as well as the final result. But I still present that with all the humility that I can muster as what I call a filter. That is to say, it seems to me that we don't really have a good sense of reality. Nobody does. We all have movies in our heads that are our personal reality. So the experiment was, if you pick this variable, does it help you predict better than other filters on the world? So it doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean there's even an objective reality necessarily, but we can observe because I predicted publicly and I said, I predict this, and then you can see if it was true, and they were good predictions.
Right, because there's a lot of folks out there that go, all right, guy gets lucky predicting a Trump win, now I got a friggin' book in front of me? Come on, man, you're giving yourself too much credit. And it sounds like what you're saying is, maybe, we'll never know.
I always make fun of the fact that somebody becomes a billionaire, they start a company, everything goes right, and then the first thing they do is write a book. It's like, yeah, well, everything I did must be the right thing to do. Of course, there's just no logic to that. Some people were going to succeed. It was 1,000 variables. Every one of them had to line up to make this happen. You should be cautious of someone who writes a book and said, I succeeded, and therefore you should do it this way. So I try to write books that say, here's a process. You could try it yourself. It doesn't cost you anything. Compare it to what you were doing. Make your own decision.
Sometimes you'll hear entrepreneurs say things like, just follow your passion. But the problem is when Mark Cuban or somebody says something like that, he can say that and we see it because he's on Shark Tank. There's a lot of other people who believe the same thing and they live in the basement on their mom's couch because that's not good advice, but it sounds really good. And it certainly sounds better than be in the right place at the right time, work really hard. Here's how you manage a team of talented employees. Here's how you recruit those employees. Here's how you outsource manufacturing to China in a cost-effective way. No. Screw that. Follow your dreams. Where's my check?
Yeah, and then nobody wants to admit that luck is a gigantic factor. So the way I dealt with luck in my own career is I tried lots and lots of stuff, and I waited for something to catch on. But in advance, you never really know which one's going to work.
We had somebody on the show in the past. He talked about the role of luck and how when he was doing studies of entrepreneurs and things like that, we all minimize the role that luck plays in anything that actually gives us an advantage. Because as a culture, we don't look at things that are considered lucky and say, this is a good thing to have on my side, because we don't believe in magic and things like that. It's a very Western concept. Whereas if we do look at luck and we go, wow, I am so lucky that I started this podcast and that I learned good work ethic from my father and I stuck with it, and then I got laid off from my law job. That was actually lucky. And then I kept doing this, and now I'm in this great place and interviewing all these great writers and things like that. That looks like luck if you really examine all these right things that fell into place. But it's much nicer for me, my ego, to say, actually, I just had a really good vision and I stuck to it because I'm very tenacious and I'm a hard worker, and all these other things happened to me, but I persevered anyway. No, luck, of course not. I earned all this.
There's also a weird connection between perceived luck and your attitude. So there actually were studies, Dr. Richard Wiseman studied whether people had luck. He found that you can fake luck, meaning that if you say to yourself, I'm lucky, something good's going to happen. It turns out it changes your perceptual abilities. It sets your filter differently. So if you expect luck, even if you're just talking yourself into it, you're more likely to notice something or even maybe do something a little bit differently. So it's sort of a way of programming yourself to notice luck that was going to happen no matter what. You just wouldn't have noticed before.
Is that called the reticular activation system?
Yeah, that's one of the things for you. For example, pick out your name in a crowd when everything else is just crowd noise. Once you set your focus on something, you just start noticing those things things which matter to that focus. And that's fairly well documented.
Why do you hate analogies so much? I use analogies all the time on the show to teach and illustrate concepts, and I'll often get an email. Scott Adams says that analogies, if you use those, you've already lost.
Probably nothing is more misunderstood than my view of analogies. Let me see if I can, for the first time ever, clearly explain what I mean. Analogies for explaining a new concept are excellent. So I'm not saying analogies are bad all the time. I'm saying that nobody ever won an argument with an analogy. So nobody ever said, well, you've got a mustache, Hitler had a mustache, apparently you're going to invade Poland. So that's the sort of way people try to win an argument with an analogy. If you're trying to describe a zebra to someone who'd never seen it, you say, well, it's like a horse. Imagine you painted some stripes on it, and it would get you there faster. So analogies, excellent way to describe a new concept, but you're never going to win an argument with an analogy.
Because you're arguing about something that you've set up that isn't what you're actually arguing about?
Every analogy gives the opponent infinite ammunition to attack because the analogy is imperfect by its design. That's what an analogy is. It's not the thing. It's something that just has something in common with the thing. So you know that your opponent, who is not going to be swayed at all, is going to say, well, look at all the problems with that analogy. A, B, C, it's completely different because of this. You can never get to the end of that path. So analogies are useless.
There's so much in Win Bigly that has to do with persuasion and things like the power of slogans, the power of color association, the power of contrast. I'd like to wrap with the concept of strategic ambiguity, because as soon as I heard that, I went, oh my God, I think I see this all the time, and I think I use this all the time, and never knew what that was called. Can we talk about why this is so effective? Well, first of all, what is it, and why is it so effective?
So strategic ambiguity, the way I use it in this context, is when you present, let's say a politician says, I want to do this or that, it's stated in a way that everybody gets to hear what they wanted to hear.
I just don't want people to go, this is all BS because we're talking about somebody I don't like, because then the whole thing is lost. But I think Trump's examples are perfect for this because he's the one using it, and it's what the book is about.
There are people who think that he is super tough on immigration because he's a racist. In other words, they are racist themselves, and they probably think, hey, this is great. We found one of our own. But there are people who are not racist, just regular Republicans, who don't see anything like that. They just say, border control is just normal business for protecting the country. Their frame is completely different. But both of them can see in the way that the president talks their own message. Now, some are going to call that the secret racist dog whistle. But I would say that the secret whistle is present anytime there's ambiguity. Anytime there's any lack of clarity, people are putting their own interpretation on it. If it happens to be a topic of racism, then people hear the magic whistle. If it's some other topic, then they just get a different opinion about what the person said. But since we're kind of locked into our previous opinions of the world, any ambiguity, it lets you see whatever you want to see.
So basically, our mind fills in the blanks. And if we're strategic about our ambiguity, we're saying or doing something deliberately so that other people's minds will fill in the blanks.
Take my example of writing about President Trump's persuasion, but not backing him on policies. So that's ambiguous because people don't expect you to say anything positive about the side you're not on, even if you're talking about a narrow part of that, right? It just doesn't fit with people's idea that you need to be on the left or the right. So it gives people on the left a reason to like me because I say I'm left of Bernie, but only with practical plans. And people say, oh, I'm left of Bernie too, so I can like it. But other people can say, oh, you wrote about this guy I don't like, so I hate him. Well, I've created ambiguity. It wasn't strategic.
Yeah. Maybe a little too late.
But it does allow me a little wiggle room. So if somebody says, my God, you've aligned with this monster, I can say, read everything I've said. My policy preferences are completely different. I have at least that ambiguity working for me.
Scott, is there anything else that you want to communicate?
All right, we talked about making people think past the sale. That's a strongish technique, but it's not like the strongest. Among the strongest would be contrast. The ability to set up, this thing is horrible and this thing is great. That's something you see the best politicians do. They don't just say, hey, we can improve. My idea is good. That doesn't create contrast. You want to say, Obamacare is the worst thing in the world. It's falling apart. Everybody's going to die. And I've got this plan. This is the best thing in the world. It's going to give everybody health. If we can abstract from the politics and the facts, persuasion-wise, the greater the contrast, the better you can make the persuasion.
How is that different from just hyperbole? Because it sounds like just hyperbole, this is the best and this is terrible. How is the power of contrast different? Of course, it seems like hyperbole fits into a larger circle that is...
Yeah, in this case, you're using hyperbole to create the contrast. Yeah.
Is there another way that we could do this that might seem maybe a little bit less right on the nose? I mean, I think everyone who knows we can just exaggerate in two different directions.
Let's say you wanted to attract a mate and you weren't using just online dating, which I suppose everybody would just do now. But if you put yourself in a situation where there's something that you can do well compared to the other people, then people are going to say, oh, in this narrow field of whatever we're doing here, it's a sport or whatever it is, this one person is good. That kind of contrast makes you look like you're genetically advantaged in some way. At least you're good at this one thing. And that just triggers people automatically to say, oh, I guess I need to mate with somebody who's got good genes to do this thing.
Totally makes sense, right? That somebody who's really good at dancing would maybe do better in a mating scenario where dancing is involved.
But for the contrast, you don't want that person who's a dancer to go where all the good dancers are.
So you have to go to the dance club where everyone else stands on the wall and you're the one that's on the dance.
I have a friend who shall remain nameless, but he took up dancing, really like high level of dancing, the kind of where you go to the club and people form a circle because they go, oh my goodness, this is somebody who's like semi-professional or something. He hired dancing coaches and everything. So when he goes to the club, the contrast between what he's doing and what everyone else is doing is so shocking that, he becomes everybody's friend and it's this amazing social experience. And he did it through entirely the power of contrast.
Scott, thank you so much. The book Win Bigly out October 31st. So by the time you listen to this, you can go and buy it. And you will never look at television the same way because you can look at these examples and look, if you're anti-Trump or you're super pro-Trump, this will be interesting to you for different reasons, I would imagine, but it will cause you to look at behavior differently. And I think that's the big win from the book.
I hope it changes how people see the universe itself.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
I've got some thoughts on this one, but before I get into that, I wanted to give you a preview of one of my favorite stories from an earlier episode of the show. Megan Phelps Roper, she used to belong to one of the most hateful religious cults in America, the Westboro Baptist Church. She was born into this church and she later escaped. To hear her tell the story firsthand, it's really incredible.
I started protesting when I was 5 years old, but even at that first picket, there was a sign that said, gays are worthy of death. So God hates fags is what Westboro's message that we became known for. We were the good guys, and everyone outside the church was evil and going to hell, and we had the only message that would bring the world any hope. We had to go and warn people. These terrible things are happening, and if you want this pain to stop, then you have to change, because God isn't going to change. After the September 11 attacks, we had the sign that said, thank God for September 11. What were we thinking? This massive crowd comes down. We were at this corner of this intersection of these three streets. By the time they actually reached us, we're just enraged. There was no space between us and them. It got really dicey. One of my cousins gave his signs to somebody else and started standing on top of a trash can, pretending like he wasn't with us. They were, again, incredibly intense because obviously the circumstances are so sobering. It brings me incredible sadness to think about now. I can't do this forever. My family, they would refuse to have any contact with me at all once I left. Somebody that we had confided in sent a letter to my parents and told them that we were planning to leave. And then that email came in and we left.
For more with Megan, including the details of her harrowing experience and escape, check out episode 302 of The Jordan Harbinger Show. So what do you think? Interesting show, right? I don't know if I buy every single example here. Some of it could just be coincidence. And Scott does acknowledge that in the book, to be fair. Hey, some of this stuff might have happened. Some of it might be us rationalizing that it's a persuasive tactic and not merely a bumble that looks like one in some respects under certain lighting, etc. Or maybe it is a persuasive tactic. We really don't know. Either way, the results of the 2016 election kind of speak for themselves in a certain way. What this meant for 2020 and beyond is a different story entirely. And I think once we decide that it doesn't matter what the examples are, we can start to spot cognitive dissonance in ourselves and in others, as well as attempts to persuade us. Very useful skill set here, obviously. Big thank you to Scott Adams. The book title is Win Bigly. That'll be linked up in the show notes. Worksheets for the episode also in the show notes. Transcripts are in the show notes. We've got a brand new clips channel as well as our YouTube channel, jordanharbinger.com/YouTube and jordanharbinger.com/clips with stuff you can't find anywhere else. I'm at Jordan Harbinger on both Twitter and Instagram, or just hit me on LinkedIn. I'm teaching you how to connect with great people and manage relationships using software, systems, and tiny habits, the same stuff that I'm using. Dig that well before you get thirsty. The course is free, jordanharbinger.com/course. And like I said, most of the guests on the show subscribe to the course and contribute to the course. So come join us. You'll be in smart company. This show is created in association with Podcast One. My team is Jen Harbinger, Jay Sanderson, Robert Fogarty, Millie Ocampo, Ian Baird, Josh Ballard, and Gabriel Mizrahi. Remember, we rise by lifting others. The fee for the show is that you share it with friends when you find something useful or interesting. If you know anybody who's interested in persuasion and those types of topics, this would be a good one for them. I hope you find something great in every episode of the show. Please do share the show with those you care about. In the meantime, do your best to apply what you hear on the show so you can live what you listen, and we'll see you next time. This episode is also sponsored by LifeLock. Traveling on summer vacation is a great way to disconnect, but sometimes you need to connect to public Wi-Fi to take care of some emails and photos, wherever. Cyber criminals can spy on unsecured public Wi-Fi networks to see your browsing history, read emails, even get your passwords. Every day we put our information at risk on the internet. In an instant, a cyber criminal can steal what's yours, sometimes even harm your finances and your credit. Good thing there's LifeLock. LifeLock helps detect a wide range of identity threats like your social security number for sale on the dark web. If they detect your information has been potentially compromised, they'll send you an alert. You have access to a dedicated restoration information specialist if you do become a victim.
No one can prevent all identity theft or monitor all transactions at all businesses, but you can help protect what's yours with LifeLock by Norton. Join now and save up to 25% off your first year at LifeLock.com/Jordan. That's LifeLock.com/Jordan for 25% off.
Hey, Brienne, can I tell you a secret?
I mean, can you do it in a secret whisper voice?
Oh, can I? Ready?
Yeah.
We're hosting a podcast. Sorry, not a whisper.
And no longer a secret.
Well, working on both. My name is Alexis Gay. I'm a comedian and podcast host with, almost a decade of experience in business operations and partnerships. Your timeless tale of leaving the tech world to become a full-time comedian.
And I'm Brienne Kimmel, founder of Work Life VC and an early investor in 7 unicorns.
Some would say that's a lot of unicorns.
I meet hundreds of companies each year and help the fastest growing startups scale their business.
And we're the hosts of The Shakeup, where we explore the decisions that dared to be different.
And talk with the leaders who are shaking up their industry.
Love a good name in the description callback.
Each week, we'll bring in research and data-backed insights to worm our way into the minds of business leaders.
Honestly, thank you for not using the phrase pick your brain. And we'll learn how they make the decisions that challenge the status quo.
The Shakeup is part of the new HubSpot podcast network.
Right. You'll hear from the likes of Rachel Drury, the founder of Daily Harvest.
You know, what I like to say is Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine, right? Well, we've ended up with a Hippocratic oath for medicine being thy medicine, whereas food has kind of lost its way. So we're really here to change that.
And Jim McKelvey, the co-founder of Square.
I always use the word innovation as a mass noun, like cement. Like you don't buy a cement, you buy cement. It's this thing. It's volume. So to me, innovation is a mass noun.
Oh, and Sarah Lee and Christine Chang, the co-founders of Glow Recipe.
I love their masks.
Ooh, me too. I mean, I'm definitely not wearing one right now.
Wait, are you?
We'll never know.
Korean beauty is about a philosophy, and it's something that we ourselves learned at our mothers and grandmothers' knees growing up. And it's really about a joyful, sensorial, and of course, efficacious approach to skincare. And the approach is very deliberate and thoughtful. And that was kind of getting lost in translation.
You can follow The Shakeup on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Cast, Casted, all the casts. Whatever cast you like, we're there.
New episodes drop August 3rd.
Yes, so soon. See you there.
Hey, you're listening to the Creative Pep Talk podcast. We help you build a thriving creative practice. I'm your host, Andy J. Pizza! Go to creativepeptalk.com/newsletter and subscribe so you never miss an episode and you're able to make consistent creative progress each and every week. Now let's get into today's episode. Shop, design, and sell custom fabric, wallpaper, and home decor on Spoonflower. If DIYing is your jam, Spoonflower is the destination for print on demand. Fabric, wallpaper, home decor too. Visit spoonflower.com, won't you? That's my rap. Spoonflower.com. Okay, so we're going to do a series on overthinking. When you're overthinking, when you're sick of thinking so much about making creative stuff that you're not actually making creative stuff. I've just recently had this burden on me to make sure that my podcast does not become an excuse not to make all of these ideas that I'm sharing every single week. They're not gospel truth. They are prompts. They are something that hopefully stokes the flame and gets you creating. And so I started, I'm such an overthinker. And I define overthinking as when you think more than you do. Now, I'm such an overthinker that I thought, wait a second, that definition sounds a little bit smarter than you, Andy. Now I need to go scour the internet for an hour and make sure that doesn't come from somewhere else. That's how much I couldn't, by the way, just for those of you who are worrying, I still think that that's my definition, but you guys can prove me wrong. Tell me, maybe I'm quoting someone and don't realize it. But that's the level of overthinking that I do as I go to create this podcast and anything else that I ever create. But, real quick, on this show, that I am a huge fan of thinking. I think that in America in particular, that we call any thinking overthinking. And it's one of the reasons I've never really tackled this subject is I think we have an anti-intellectualism in America. We have an craft and ruminating and let's really get cerebral in what we're working on and know what we're doing and have a plan and a strategy. I think we overvalue execution. There's all of these quotes, all these ideas floating on the internet of like, I ideas are a dime a dozen. What really matters is executing. So just steal ideas and execute them. No, I'm not for that. I'm all about sharpening the axe. You know that there's a famous, I think it's George Washington quote, probably not him, that says, if you had 3 hours to cut down a tree, how would you spend the time? They're like, I'd spend the first 2.5 hours sharpening the axe. I think thinking is sharpening the axe. I believe in being mindful about your practice and mental breakthroughs and really evaluating and getting best course of action and strategy and all that stuff. I am all for that. But what I'm not for is doing so much thinking that you don't spend any time doing. And even worse, you spend so much time thinking so much that it gets in your head as you go to execute, as you go to create, that you can't get out of your head and into your hands and make stuff. And so I started getting overwhelmed with this feeling that, oh dear God, what if Creative Pep Talk causes people ever in any capacity to overthink? Because the reason I create this show is to give you a new prompt, a new set of fresh ideas that help you believe that your actions are going to make a difference. But if you don't actually take any action, this listening to the show is completely a waste. Now, I think we talk about a lot of really good stuff on the show. I believe in the show that I have made. But to counterbalance that, I'm going to do a 3-part series on overthinking. When you are overthinking and it's time to act. Because if you do not, it's kind of like a tightrope. There's a balance too. If you don't balance the thinking and the doing, you will become imbalanced and the whole thing will come crashing down. So I'm teaching my son to ride his bike. And, this is me. I'm going to call out my overthinking as an example for you of how bad I am at overthinking and how much I've had to overcome to take action, show up every week and make this show, make art for the show, make art for my personal projects throughout the year, make art for clients, like so much overcoming overthinking throughout all of that. And, as I tell you, I'm teaching my son to ride his bike. My brain starts thinking, they're going to think, they're going to be like, oh, what a good dad. And I'm like, well, I'm a okay dad. Like, it's hard for me to even, that's what I do. I start thinking about, well, I probably should have started earlier and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, that's my overthinking. I'm teaching my son to ride his bike. And it's been really rewarding, and it's been frustrating and hard. And it's such a battle, like getting your kid to find the bravery to risk falling and failure. It's a lot of coaching and psychology. It's not easy. And so we went over to this empty parking lot, and they have these big stretches of straight, flat asphalt to practice. And so before we start, I'm thinking, I got to tell them a few things. I'm like, listen, before you get on here, here's a few things to think about. Keep your handlebars straight. We're just going to work on going straight ahead. Look ahead. Don't look at your feet. And then these right here, they're the gears, and you want to shift these on a steep incline so that you can maximize the torque and minimize the friction. And on another thing, we're going to need you to shave that head because all that hair is going to really hurt your aerodynamics. Now, there are basically 3 schools of thought on leg tension. And I can feel, hopefully, you're like, please, Andy, tell me you didn't say that, because as I started, before you realized it was not real, you were thinking, Andy, no, that's too much for him to think about before he gets started. He's going to be so in his head, he's not going to be able to do the next right thing. And it's so obvious when you're teaching your kid to ride his bike that you can't let the thinking get ahead of the doing. But tell that to Andy circa 2010, who's about to get into block printing, who just bought all the top tier professional equipment, read the articles about acid-free paper and ventilation. If you're going to really make anything worthwhile, you need to learn this carve technique and that technique. And blah, 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 blah. Or in 2010, when I wanted to start this podcast even, and I look into the mic, the perfect mic, and the soundproofing and the software and the hosting and how to hack to get the best new podcasts on Apple and blah, 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 blah. I do so much planning and thinking that I don't actually do anything because I get overwhelmed by the overthinking. And it takes me 4 years to get the courage up to take some action and launch that podcast. In fact, my whole basement is a graveyard of overthought creative projects: screen printing, block printing, ceramics, acrylic paint, gouache paint, wood canvases, real canvases we're going to make from scratch, canvases we bought online, podcasting equipment, on and on and on. Why is it that over and over I forget and overthink and imbalance the thinking and the doing in my own life? But it's so obvious when it comes to teaching my son to ride his bike. There's one thing that I told him before we got started, and it was this. This is the real thing I said. I said, in order to stay balanced, you have to go faster than you feel ready for. You have to do something that is beyond what you think you're ready for. That's how you stay balanced. You got to push so fast that the balance takes care of itself. And on today's show, it's a life-saving mission. How do we keep the latest creative endeavor out of the creative graveyard? How do we save its life? How do we stop it from becoming yet another failed creative experiment? We too have to do more than we think we're ready for to stay in balance. You're overthinking. Put your feet to the pedals. Let's not think about this anymore. And in the words of my hero, one of my all-time heroes, Abby Jacobson, let's not think this. Let's do this. Because if we don't, we're not going to get started at all. I mentioned that I wanted to start this podcast back in 2010, and it took me 4 years to actually get started. And what I did was I started before I felt ready. I said, screw all the perfect ways to launch a podcast and do a podcast, and screw the mic. I'm doing it on my phone. Screw the recording room. I'm doing it on the bike trail. Screw the perfect hosting with all the maxed out stuff where you can hack the algorithm and blah, 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 blah. I'm loading them up to my blog, submitting it to Apple, and doing it now. Why? Because I realized that if I waited until I thought that I was ready, that I would never pedal fast enough to stay balanced. And the way that I have continued to stay balanced in my practice when I am is by making sure that I pedal faster than I think that I'm ready for it, that I act before I think I'm ready consistently. Because for me, my imbalance, if I let that thing just ride out, I am going to fall off the side of overthinking. And if you're like that too, this episode is for you. So I'm going to tell you the 3 things that I wish that I had heard getting started. They're 3 most essential things, and they're going to help you stop overthinking, focus on the right things, and get started. Start pedaling faster than you think that you're ready for. How do you do that? The first way you do it, the first way to cut out a whole bunch of overthinking super fast is to, number 1, make creativity. Make your creative output a habit. Why? Because my definition of a habit is something you do without thinking. That just cuts out a whole bunch of thinking. You don't even ask yourself, should I run today? Should I not run today? Well, your habit is running every other day, so you don't even have to think about it. You just do it. That's what creativity needs to become. This series, part of the series was inspired by a friend of mine who is getting back into the creative practice, and they've been listening to the show. And I just started thinking they're going to start listening to hundreds of episodes, and they're going to get in their head, and they're not going to actually make anything, man. And that's where I just felt this intense energy to create this series, to just be like a beacon of don't overthink it, pedal faster than you're thinking, do more than you think you're ready for. And the first thing I thought was, the first thing you need to do is to make this a habit. And I have learned a thing or two, both from experience and from reading, studying, and trying different things and self-help and all that about creating habits. My habits now are so much better than they were 10 years ago. When Sophie met me, I'll tell you, I'm not going to tell you all of my bad habits, but I was smoking a pack a day, also chewing tobacco, drinking 6 cans of Pepsi Max, which was the British Pepsi Max. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe it. But that was what I was doing. And I was binge eating. I was not exercising. I have come a long way just in in terms of habit formation. And I've done it from, becoming good at habits. What I believe the secret to habit formation is, and I think there's a lot of research to back this up, is if you struggle to make something a habit, then the goal should be to make it a habit. That can be your only goal until it's a habit. Now, experts have different opinions on how long you have to do something for it to become an automatic behavior, for it to become something you do without thinking. But for me, I like to say, because I'm especially bad at forming habits, I try to make it 6 months to a year of a goal. When I started running and I thought I want to run every other day, I had to be militant about not adding any other goals, not doing any other thinking, except for my goal is to make this a habit. Meaning all I have to do is run every other day. I can run for as long as I want. I can run as slow as I want, but I can't not run unless there's an extreme circumstance. And so the first year of running, that was my only goal. And so I've been doing every other day running more or less for about 3 years now. Now I'm starting to think about speed, starting to up my times and my pace of my 3-mile runs. And I have the rule of every run is at least 3 miles. So I've added things over time and went from just forming the habit to how I want that habit to actually exist. But I started trying to lift weights this year, and I started off really strong. I went 6 months lifting every single time I ran. But then I was doing curls and I was doing this over the head thing that I saw online. Don't worry, I wasn't just making it up. Some crazy weightlifters here like, whoa, over the head thing, man. You're going to pull something. No, I looked it up. I just don't know what it's called. It's a real move. And I was doing that every time. I was doing some, a few rounds, a few reps is what they say. I did a few reps every time I ran. And then as I was doing them, I thought I didn't guard myself to my prone mind of overthinking. And I started thinking, okay, you know what else? If I'm doing this, I might as well add getting on the ground and doing some kind of bench press moves with it. And while I was down there, I started thinking, well, now that I'm down here every time, I should probably add some crunches in there to really, because otherwise all this is, I'm not really doing enough for this to actually be anything. And so 6 months in, started adding this stuff until guess what? I quit doing it altogether and I haven't done it for 2 months. And the reason why was because I tried to make it more than a habit. Before it was a habit, I tried to do it perfectly. I got in my head and I thought too much about it until I was like, you know what, just forget it. I can't do it at all. And so here's the biggest piece of advice. The thing that changed my practice is when I created a habit. My first personal project I did, my first big one was called Nod. You've heard me talk about it on the show. I did a new character every weekday for a year. That thing, there were so many bad things about that project. There's so many ways that it was a waste of time. There were so many ways I could have been doing crunches while I was down on that creative floor. But guess what? The point was making it a habit above all things. And I've seen it so many times. I feel like a lot of musicians, because of the natural cycle of things, making album in a certain amount of time, writing, recording, touring, cyclical thing, that they don't end up making their thing a habit. Now, I think there's a time and place for rest. I do think that's true. But I think that time and place happens after you have a rest, after you have a rhythm and a habit in place that you can slide right back into. And I think you should be careful in the ways that you are intentional about going back to the habit. But I see a lot of musicians that go years without writing. And I think that it makes it so much harder because in my experience, you've got to make a lot of crap to get anything good. There's something psychological even about knowing that everything that you make doesn't have to be a masterpiece that I feel like is the ideal way to tap into play, which is your ideal brain space when making. And that's when some fun stuff happens. And I think the best way, Seth Godin says, the best way to have good ideas is to have tons and tons and tons of bad ideas. And so the way to do that, the way to make sure you do that is to create a habit. So if you don't have a creative habit, if you don't have a rhythm to making, this podcast has been my creative habit for 7 years. 7 years of, I wanted to be a public speaker and a storyteller. 7 years of storytelling every single week. Some of them are better than others. I know. 7 years of making episode art. That means I never go a week, hardly ever, except for weeks off where we take a break, where I don't make a finished piece of illustration. That is the creative habit. If you don't have a creative habit, do not think about anything else until creativity becomes something you do without thinking. That's how you're going to start pedaling faster than you think you're ready for, because there's a million reasons not to create. We're going to get into that in episode 2 of this series. We're going to talk about how there's a million reasons not to create, much more reasons not to create than to create. But the reason to create is much, much bigger and more important than all those other nagging ideas. But we don't have time to get into that now. We're going to go to number 2. But before we do, 2 resources. One is Atomic Habits, which I have read the Blinkist, short version of that one. And it's all about the science of habit formation. Highly recommend finding resources that will help you figure out how your brain needs to create habits. For me, it means I got to focus on the habit before I make the habit any good or add any other goals to it. The second resource is The Creative Habit by Twyla Tharp, all about creativity, making creativity a habit. Highly recommend both of those. Go check them out. And another thing that I love about Spoonflower, this is the ads for our special sponsors.
James Clear, Atomic Habits, an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones. In these blinks, we'll look at how to make positive change in your lives. It turns out the easiest way to bring about positive change is to cultivate the right habits. Listen on to discover all about habits, what they are, how you can form them, and crucially, how you can make the best ones stick. By following the few simple instructions and changing a few small behaviors, you can achieve unbelievable results. So, let's get started. Blink number 1. Small habits can have a surprisingly powerful impact on your life. Imagine a plane taking off from Los Angeles en route to New York. If during takeoff, the pilot decided to adjust course 3.5 degrees to the south, the plane's nose would move just a few feet. Outside of the cockpit, no one on board would notice the small movement. But over the course of a journey across the country, the impact of the change would be considerable, and the confused passengers would alight from their plane in Washington, D.C., not New York. We don't notice tiny changes because their immediate impact is negligible. If you are out of shape today and go for a 20-minute jog, you'll still be out of shape tomorrow. Conversely, if you eat a family-sized pizza for dinner, it won't make you overweight overnight. But if we repeat small behaviors day after day, our choices compound into major results. Eat pizza every day, and it's likely you will have gained considerable weight after a year. Go jogging for 20 minutes every day, and you'll eventually be leaner and fitter, even though you won't have noticed the change happening. If you want to make a positive change in your life, you should recognize that change requires patience, as well as confidence that your habits are keeping you on the right trajectory, even if you aren't seeing immediate results. So if you find that your behaviors and habits don't seem to be paying off, try to focus on your current trajectory rather than your current results. If you have little money in the bank but you are saving something each month, then you can be confident that your trajectory is right. Your current results might not be great, but keep going in this direction, and in a few months or a few years, you will notice a major improvement. By contrast, a millionaire who outspends his earnings each month may not be worried about his bank statements from one month to the next, but in the end, his trajectory will catch up with him. The key to making big changes in your life doesn't have to involve major upheaval. You don't need to revolutionize your behavior or reinvent yourself. Rather, you can make tiny changes to your behavior, which, when repeated time and time again, will become habits that may lead to big results. Blink number 2. Habits are automated behaviors that we've learned from experience. When you walk into a dark room, you don't think about what to do next. You instinctively reach for a light switch. It's a habit, a behavior that you've repeated so many times that it now happens automatically. So how are habits formed? Well, our brain figures out how to respond to new situations through a process of trial and error. 19th century psychologist Edward Thorndike famously demonstrated this with an experiment where cats were placed in a black box. Unsurprisingly, each cat immediately tried to escape from the box, sniffing at its corners and clawing at its walls. Eventually, the cat would find a lever that, when pressed, would open a door, enabling escape. Thorndike then took the cats that had successfully escaped and repeated the experiment. His findings? Well, after being put in the box a few times, each cat learned the trick. Rather than scrambling around for a minute or more, the cats went straight for the lever. After 20 or 30 attempts, the average cat could escape in just 6 seconds. In other words, the process of getting out of the box had become habitual. Thorndike had discovered that behaviors that give satisfying consequences, in this case gaining freedom, tend to be repeated until they become automatic. Like cats in the 19th century, we also stumble across satisfying solutions to life's difficulties and predicaments. And thankfully, we now understand a little more about how habits work. Habits begin with a cue or a trigger to act. Walking into a dark room cues you to perform an action that will enable sight. Next comes a craving for a change in state, in this case, to be able to see. Then comes our response or action, flicking the light switch. The final step in the process and the end goal of every habit is the reward. Here, it's the feeling of mild relief and comfort that comes from being able to see your surroundings. Every habit is subject to the same process. Do you habitually drink coffee every morning? Waking up is your cue, triggering a craving to feel alert. Your response is to drag yourself out of bed and make a cup of joe. Your reward is feeling alert and ready to face the world. But of course, not all habits are good for us. Now that we understand how habits work, let's look at building positive ones that improve our lives. Blink number 3. Building new habits requires hard-to-miss cues and a plan of action. All of us have cues that trigger certain habits. The buzz of your phone, for example, is a cue to check your messages. And once you understand that certain stimuli can prompt habitual behavior, you can use this knowledge to change your habits. How? Well, one way is to change your surroundings and general environment to encourage better habits. Just take the work of Boston-based Dr. Anne Thorndike. She wanted to improve her patients' dietary habits without requiring them to make a conscious decision. How did she pull this off? She had the hospital cafeteria rearranged. Originally, the refrigerators next to the cash registers contained only soda. Thorndike introduced water, not only there, but at every other drink station. Over 3 months, soda sales dropped by 11%, while water sales shot up by 25%. People were making healthier choices just because the cue to drink water rather than soda was more prominent. So, simple changes to our environment can make a big difference. Want to practice guitar? Leave the instrument out in the center of the room. Trying to eat healthier snacks? Leave them out on the counter instead of in the salad drawer. Make your cues as obvious as possible and you'll be more likely to respond to them. A second great way to strengthen cues is to use implementation intentions. Most of us tend to be too vague about our intentions. We say, I'm going to eat better, and simply hope that we'll follow through. An implementation intention introduces a clear plan of action, setting out when and where you'll carry out the habit you'd like to cultivate. And research shows that it works. A study of voters in the United States found that the citizens who were asked the questions, at what time will you vote and how will you get to the voting station, were more likely to actually turn out than those who were just asked if they would vote. So don't just say, I'll run more often. Say, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, when the alarm goes off, the first thing I'll do is don my running gear and clock 2 miles. Then leave your running shoes out where you'll see them. You'll be giving yourself both a clear plan and an obvious cue, and it may surprise you how much easier this will make it to actually build a positive running habit. Blink number 4. Humans are motivated by the anticipation of reward, so making habits attractive will help you stick to them. In 1954, neuroscientists James Olds and Peter Milner ran an experiment to test the neurology of desire. Using electrodes, they blocked the release of the neurotransmitter dopamine in rats. To their surprise, the rats simply lost the will to live. They had no desire to eat, drink, reproduce, or do anything else. Mere days later, they all died of thirst. The human brain releases dopamine, a hormone that makes us feel good, when we do pleasurable things such as eating or having sex. But we also get a hit of feel-good dopamine when we simply anticipate those pleasurable activities. It's the brain's way of driving us onward and encouraging us to actually do things. So in the brain's reward system, desiring something is on par with getting something, which goes a long way toward explaining why kids enjoy the anticipation of Christmas so much. It's also why daydreaming about your upcoming hot date is so pleasurable. We can also turn this knowledge to our advantage when trying to form habits. If we make a habit something we look forward to, we'll be much more likely to follow through and actually do it. A great technique for this is temptation bundling. This is where you take a behavior that you think of as important but unappealing and link it to a behavior that you're drawn to, one that will generate that motivating dopamine hit. Ronan Byrne, an engineering student in Ireland, knew he should exercise more, but he got little enjoyment from working out. However, he did enjoy watching Netflix, so he hacked an exercise bike, connecting it to his laptop and writing code that would only allow Netflix to run if he was cycling at a certain speed. By linking exercise literally to a behavior that he was naturally drawn to, he transformed a distasteful activity into a pleasurable one. You don't need to be an engineer to apply this to your life. If you need to work out but you want to catch up on the latest A-list gossip, you can commit to only reading magazines while at the gym. If you want to watch sports but you need to make sales calls, promise yourself a half hour of ESPN after you talk to your 10th prospect. Soon enough, you may even find those unattractive tasks enjoyable. since you'll be anticipating a pleasing reward while carrying them out. Blink number 5. If you want to build a new habit, make that habit as easy to adopt as possible. We often spend a lot of time on behaviors that are easy. Scrolling through social media, for example, takes 0 effort, so it's easy for it to fill up lots of our time. Doing 100 push-ups or studying Mandarin Chinese, in contrast, requires a lot of effort. Repeating those behaviors daily until they become habitual is tough. So making behaviors as easy as possible is key to turning them into habits. Luckily, there are a few tricks we can embrace to make anything seem easier. The first is to focus on reducing friction. The author has always been hopeless at sending greeting cards, while his wife never fails to do so. Why? Well, she keeps a box of greeting cards at home, pre-sorted by occasion, making it easier to send congratulations or condolences or whatever is called for. Since she doesn't have to go out and buy a card when someone gets married or has an accident, there's no friction involved in sending one. You can also use this approach to increase friction for bad habits. If you want to waste less time in front of the TV, unplug it and take the batteries out of the remote. Doing so will introduce enough friction to ensure you only watch when you really want to. The second trick for making a habit easier in the long term is the 2-minute rule, a way to make any new activity feel manageable. The principle is that any activity can be distilled into a habit that is doable within 2 minutes. Want to read more? Don't commit to reading 1 book every week. Instead, make a habit of reading 2 pages per night. Want to run a marathon? Commit to simply putting on your running gear every day after work. The 2-minute rule is a way to build easily achievable habits, and those can lead you on to greater things. Once you've pulled on your running shoes, you'll probably head out for a run. Once you've read 2 pages, you'll likely continue. The rule recognizes that simply getting started is the first and most important step toward doing something. Now, let's take a look at the final rule for using habits to improve your life. Blink number 6. Making your habits immediately satisfying is essential to effective behavior change. In the 1990s, public health researcher Stephen Luby, working in the neighborhood of Karachi, Pakistan, achieved a huge 52% reduction in diarrhea among the local children. Pneumonia rates dropped by 48% and skin infections by 35%. Luby's secret? Nice soap. Luby had known that hand washing and basic sanitation were essential to reducing illness. The locals understood this too, they just weren't turning their knowledge into a habit. Everything changed when Luby worked with Procter & Gamble to introduce a premium soap into the neighborhood for free. Overnight, hand washing became a satisfying experience. The new soap lathered easily and smelled delightful. Suddenly, everyone was washing their hands because it was now a pleasing activity. The final and most important rule for behavioral change is to make habits satisfying. This can be difficult for evolutionary reasons. Today, we live in what academics call a delayed return environment. You turn up at the office today, but the return, a paycheck, doesn't come until the end of the month. You go to the gym in the morning, but you don't lose weight overnight. Our brains, though, evolved to cope with the immediate return environment of earlier humans, who weren't thinking about long-term returns like saving for retirement or sticking to a diet. They were focused on immediate concerns like finding their next meal, seeking shelter, and staying alert enough to escape any nearby lions. Immediate returns can encourage bad habits, too. Smoking may give you lung cancer in 20 years, but in the moment, it relieves your stress and the craving for nicotine, which means you may ignore the long-term effects and indulge in a cigarette. So when you are pursuing habits with a delayed return, try to attach some immediate gratification to them. For example, a couple the author knows wanted to eat out less, cook more, get healthier, and save money. To do so, they opened a savings account called Trip to Europe, and every time they avoided a meal out, transferred $50 to it. The short-term satisfaction of seeing $50 land in that savings account provided the immediate gratification they needed to keep them on track for the ultimate longer-term reward. However pleasurable and satisfying we make habits, we may still fail to maintain them. So let's take a look at how we can stick to our good intentions. Blink number 7. Create a framework to keep your habits on track using trackers and contracts. Whether you're trying to write your journal or give up smoking, managing your own behaviors can be hard. Thankfully, there are a few simple measures that can help. Habit tracking is a simple but effective technique. Many people have kept a record of their habits. One of the most well-known is founding father Benjamin Franklin. From the age of 20, Franklin kept a notebook in which he recorded adherence to 13 personal virtues, which included aims like avoiding frivolous conversation and to always be doing something useful. He noted his success every night. You too can develop a habit tracker using a simple calendar or diary and crossing off every day that you stick with your chosen behaviors. You'll find it effective because habit tracking itself is an attractive and satisfying habit. The anticipation and action of crossing off each day will feel good and keep you motivated. A second technique is to develop a habit contract that imposes negative consequences if you fail to stay on track. Brian Harris, an entrepreneur from Nashville, took his habit contract very seriously. In a contract signed by him, his wife, and his personal trainer, he committed to get his weight down to 200 pounds. He identified specific habits that would help get him there, including tracking his food intake each day and weighing himself each week. Then he set up penalties for not doing those things. If he failed to track food intake, he would have to pay $100 to his trainer. If he failed to weigh himself, he would owe $500 to his wife. The strategy worked, driven not just by his fear of losing money, but by his fear of losing face in front of two people who mattered to him. Humans are social animals. We care about the opinions of those around us. So simply knowing that someone is watching you can be a powerful motivator for success. So why not set yourself a habit contract? Even if it isn't as detailed as Harris's, consider making a commitment to your partner, your best friend, or one of your coworkers. If you agree upon a set of consequences for failing to follow through, you'll be much more likely to stick to your habits. And as we've seen, sticking to a positive habit, however small, is a surefire way to achieve big things in life. Thanks for listening to our Blinks to Atomic Habits by James Clear. The Blink's main takeaway is that a tiny change in your behavior will not transform your life overnight, but turn that behavior into a habit that you perform every day, and it absolutely can lead to big changes. Changing your life is not about making big breakthroughs or revolutionizing your entire life. Rather, it's about building a positive system of habits that, when combined, deliver remarkable results. Want some more actionable advice? Use habit stacking to introduce new behaviors. If you want to build a new habit, you could try stacking it on top of an existing habit. Let's say you want to start meditating, but you're struggling to find the time. Try thinking about those things you do effortlessly each day, like drinking coffee in the morning. Then just stack the new habit on top. Commit to meditating each morning when you finished your coffee, and build on the natural momentum that comes from a habit you already have. Got feedback? Just drop an email to remember@blinkist.com.
Charles Duhigg.
I have read the Blinkist short version of that one, and it's all about the science of habit formation. Highly recommend finding resources that will help you figure out how your brain needs to create habits. For me, it means I got to focus on the habit before I make the habit any good or add any other goals to it. The second resource is The Creative Habit by Twyla Tharp, all about creativity. Making creativity a habit. I highly recommend both of those. Go check them out. And another thing that I love about Spoonflower, this is the ads for our special sponsors. Another thing I love about Spoonflower is how design challenge great things like thinking of people. The creative pep talk is to number 2, Spoonflower. Okay, the second thing that I wish that I'd known that would have helped me overthink things less when I got started is to, number 2, label your target and start with the skin and go down to the bone. Okay. That's a lot of words, but the main thing is label your target. We've talked about this idea on the show. It's a big core value of the creative pep talk universe, man. But I want to add some bits to it. And I want to tailor it specifically to getting overthinking. That was just me addressing my own overthinking of people. My overthinking said, Andy, there's going to be someone listening to this be like, we talked about targets, man. Okay. And that's me addressing you, a-hole. No, I have something fresh I want to say about this that I'm super passionate about. And actually, we had an episode with storytelling experts, Brian McDonald and Jesse Bryan recently. They have a podcast called You Are a Storyteller on our podcast network. And they came on our show a few weeks ago, and it was just the best. It was so freaking good. I mean, I was clearly very excited. A lot of you chimed in and said you really love that episode. We're definitely going to follow up a part 2. It's just so good. But after that was another thing that inspired this series, was I thought there are certain people who are just getting into any type of creative act, and they hear us pontificating about storytelling and creative philosophy. And what might happen unintentionally is that they're like my son hearing about the 3 schools of thought on leg tension. And that's so in their head, they can't even start pedaling. And I thought, oh man, I might have to do a follow-up episode to just say, here's how, yes, I stand by everything we said, but here's maybe some different ways to think about it at different stages. And by the way, there's no hierarchy. I'm not speaking to down to the people you just got started on creativity, so you need the creative diaper series. That's what this series is. No, I'm not saying that. Creative process, creative journey is cyclical in my mind. You should always be being a beginner again. There's always new, fresh curiosities. Halfway through my creative career, I had this whole other arm open up of, it's a weird idea of an arm opening up. It kind of sounds like, Mega Man with his blaster, like his arm turning into anyway, I had this whole other arm of my business branch off of the creative body of public speaking. And I was a beginner all over again. And so wherever you're at in your cycle, if you're trying to start a new creative habit, I want to address some different ways to think about what we talked about in that episode, no matter whether you're doing storytelling, music, journalism, whatever the freaking, entrepreneurial endeavors of all kinds even. I want to just say it's important to label a target. Now, on that episode, we talked about one of my favorite concepts from Brian McDonald, where he talks about armature. The armature of a story is essentially its skeleton in which you hang everything else, all the meat and the skin and all the other stuff on this skeleton. And the skeleton is basically what you might have heard called the theme, but it's really the point that this story is proving. I'm a big believer that great stories prove a point, even if the point is there is no point in life. Like a lot of nihilistic stuff, in kind of the indie films and all that kind of stuff, which is, I think it's an important point to make in different ways. But I'm digressing here. Back to the point of the point was, okay, I'm sorry. Very excited. So he says, a good story starts with this structure that everything hangs on a central point. Everything proves this point. Everything comes back to this point. I'm a big believer in that. And then you hang the meat and the skin being of the movie or the story, how it looks. How are you going to skin this thing? You're telling a story. For me, Invisible Things, the armature is very similar to probably my all-time favorite book, which is The Little Prince. And in that book is all about, to see the truth, to see what really matters, you've got to look using more than your eyes. That's in my own words. Well, the quote from the book is actually, it is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. And that is essentially what my project Invisible Things is all about. It's the same armature with different meat and skin, which I think is a very legitimate form of creativity, if I do say so myself. But again, overthinking. But that's the armature, right? The meat and the skin is, how are you going to tell that armature? How, what particulars, what setting, what characters, what is it? Fantasy? Is it, is it Middle Earth? Is it in space? Like that's the meat and the skin, right? But the most important part is that the armature is good, that the armature is a moving truth that is worthwhile and that everything points back to it. Okay, anyway, that's what we talked about on that episode. And as I left, I thought what's really interesting to me is that it sounds like we're saying the only way to start telling a story is to start from the bones and move outwards. When in fact, Invisible Things happened for me creatively exactly in the exact opposite way. And that there's this pattern in my career where the target went from skin to meat to bone. And there's this intuitive way that's not cerebral, this intuitive way of taking action on the thing that you know, that you have a hunch on. You know, for me, Invisible Things, and if you're not familiar, if this is your first time listening, Invisible Things is just a world of invisible creatures that personify invisible forces in our life, like love and melancholy and gravity and all these kind of things. That became such a central part of my practice. And it came from not that armature. I didn't even know that it was about that the most important things are things you have to see using more than your eyes. I didn't even know that was what I was all about as a human, which it is. What I knew was I'm really into the characters in my inspirations that are hiding part of their face, or they're hiding in a tree trunk or whatever. I've talked about this on the show. And that was just how these ideas were skinned. And I had to have the faith to pedal faster than I thought I was ready for. I had to take that inspiration, believing there's something more to this, and I'm just going to make stuff with this kind of skin as I dig into the meat. You could definitely re-edit this podcast to be some kind of horror show. Digging into the skin. Lord. But there's this opposite way of approaching this thing before you really know what your practice is all about. And the tool you use to dig is the creative work itself. It is the making. And so what I want you to do, depending on where you're at in this latest pursuit, is to define your target. Know what am I doing right now? Am I doing the skin? Am I doing the meat? Am I doing the bone? And the top, when I first started, my target was all about taste. It was all about lo-fi, handmade, indie picture making. And it was very much just like this industry as a whole, this group of people that get it. And it was just very loose. It wasn't cerebral. It was just a feeling. It was just an intuition. And that was just the skin. It was just like, I like the veneer of this work. And my target is to be able to make work that is in that kind of good taste. But it's very skin deep. I didn't have more than that. I just knew these are the people that get it. These are kind of some qualities of this stuff. And so if that's you just getting started, it might just look like your target is just, knowing what you like and kind of making something in the realm of that, even if you don't fully understand why. You just start making before you know why. The middle part was when I started realizing I've actually got to develop this as a craft. I've really got to get some meat, some substance to the stuff that I'm making. And I started, for me, that was, I need to start drawing digitally. And there was this huge gap because I'd done everything completely hand drawn. And then in that period of time, I was really focused on the craft, putting in the time, putting in the hours, and developing some hard skills. And that was the target. And I knew the stuff I was working on was the personal projects, the habit that I had, were moving me towards that, and moving me towards also being able to prove that I could meet a brief. That was also in those middle days. Started creating projects that were proof that I had the substance of how to execute for a particular task in a particular market. So it was all about craft. And then in more recent days, getting down to the bone of what is this all hanging on? What is the structure? What is the point? I've become obsessed with, creativity as kind of this reaching for a transcendent act in your work. And I rarely get there, but sometimes I feel like I'm starting to taste it. And that's my target. And my target, that transcendence, is I want to tell stories with my pictures, with my talks, with this podcast, with my classes, with everything that I do. Why I'm doing it? I want to tell stories that inspire people to say yes to life. that's a transcendent thing. That's a thing. That's the magic of creativity. That's something that that target is, I have to get into the mechanics of when do I feel like that? Why? How did they get me there? And then I got to practice it. I got to tell stories every week on here. I got to tell stories on Instagram. I got to tell stories for picture books. I got to keep writing and trying to hit that target, but I know the target that I'm trying to hit. I'm trying to give people the feeling of when you walk out of a movie and you're like, yes, like life has something worth living for. It is a posture towards life, a yes or a no. When you get out of bed, are you resisting life that's coming at you, the good, the bad, the ugly, or are you embracing it? Stories have the power to help you remember what is worth living for. That's the kind of stories I want to tell. I was talking to my buddy, Kyle Sheely, who I made a picture book with, pizza with everything on it. And we were talking about this meme that we saw that was like a kid watching a movie in a theater and he's like transforming. And it says something about like me transforming my personality to be like the coolest person in this movie. And I was like, I've never felt more seen. And he told me that when he'd seen the movie Tarzan, he left the cinema to go to the bathroom, and he went to the bathroom on all fours like Tarzan. And I told him that for me, the clearest memory of this happening was watching Family Matters and knowing Steve Urkel could turn himself into this cooler character through this like science chamber of Stefan Urkel. And so embarrassing. I would go into my closet and put on this Charlotte Hornets robe and pretend like I was the cool version. I actually, I called myself Wes. And Andy didn't go to school the next day. Wes did. And the truth is, it's hilarious. It's ridiculous, but it's also truth. That story told me like you get to decide who you show up as today, and you can become someone new. And Stefan Urkel was a manifestation of the Alan Watts quote, "You are not obligated to be the person you were 5 minutes ago," right? Steve Urkel was on another level, philosophically speaking. That's the kind of story that I'm talking about. So that's what I'm trying to spend my creative energy doing. I'm trying to make something that will make a kid crawl to the bathroom. All the things you could take out of context on this episode. Like Tarzan, crawl to the bathroom like Tarzan. That's what I want to do, man, because that is the power. That's a transcendent power. And so, but I didn't always know that. And I could have never found that if I hadn't pedaled faster than I was ready for, right? If I hadn't just taken that skin deep thing of like a hunch of like, I think it's these weird hidden kind of things, man, like something like that, and just started making it a habit. So figure out whatever it is. It can be skin deep. It can be cutting to the bone, but have an idea of like, what am I trying to do in this creative habit? What is the target that I'm trying to hit? Because yes, great creative work has an armature. It has, marrow, right? But it doesn't always start that way. Sometimes it starts in the reverse. All right, the number 3 thing that I would tell myself when I was starting out, when I was prone to overthinking and not pedaling at all, creatively speaking, just in case you thought this was a biking podcast, would be to desperately surround yourself with people with the same target and a creative habit. Now, I harp on about this all the time on the show, but I want to add a new layer here I want to dig deeper on why this matters so much. And the reason was because just recently I remembered what it felt like when at the start of my career, I lost my creative community. And the feeling and the experience was more than skin deep. It was profound. When I was at college, I'd formed this little group of people, and we'd made this magazine, and we had this this community and this competition and this all of this energy of what happens when a few people's consciousness merges together, man, and it just starts popping off, and your things start just happening. You're pedaling, and when you're pedaling so fast, and the pedals are pedaling themselves, and your feet are just trying to keep up. That's what it's like with the community. The creative community thing is happening when you surround yourself with people who have the same target. In college, we all had that skin deep level thing of taste. We just all liked the same things, and we got it. These are the people that get it. We couldn't get more cerebral than that at the time, and that was fine. That was perfect. That was good in that moment. But then I picked up my family, and we moved back to America. I'd done college in the UK. And I thought, all of my opportunities and all of this energy and all this creative habit, it's all going to just keep going because it's already moving. But I failed to realize the insanely essential piece of community. And I spent a good year feeling like I'd lost the pulse of the creative path. Like, really, if you felt that before, you know what it feels like when you're like, man, I was right squarely in it. And now I just can't even find my way back. It has the sensation of actually feeling lost. And I remember spending a year in that zone of just can't make heads or tails of any of this stuff. Like, it just feels like I've lost the magic of what I was doing. And it felt so like I was going somewhere, that there was a purpose with this, and there was some universal energy propelling this thing forward. And my gears were locked up, to use the bike metaphor. And just recently, I was telling someone this story, and I was talking about what it felt like then to get this email from my buddy, Andrew Nyer, who became my buddy. I didn't know him at the time. He asked me to come do a mural at his gallery. And we did this collaborative project called Color Me. We created a huge mural, black and white mural that's essentially a coloring page. And Andrew made these giant 5-foot markers. And we've gone on to do that show, all throughout America and even in Europe. And we're still doing it, man. But the reason I bring it up is doing that show was the first moment in over a year that I felt the creative pulse again, that I felt the thread, that I could feel that my feet were on the path again. And I remember walking down the street with him going, we're going to go grab a bite and head back to the gallery, and just being like, it's back. What is it? It's here. And what it is the space in between people with the same passion and target. And to get more specific about that, in the abstract, I'm sure you felt it, but when it's that abstract, it's easy to just discount it as nothing more than a feeling, when in fact, it is an essential piece of the lifeblood of your practice. And here's why I think it is, and why you need to prioritize this as a central part every single step of your creative practice. There's 4 reasons why I think it's essential to spend time and be in community with people with the same creative habits. First one is the limiting belief thing. Creativity, it's a competitive thing. There are a lot of people practicing. And in order to be your best, you've got to go beyond your limiting beliefs. What you think is possible for your creative output and your talent and your skill. And I'm, very inspired by this idea of how humans, the Olympics are going on right now, and you're watching these people do these incredible things. And I'm so inspired by how over time we have realized that it's actually possible to run the mile faster than we ever dreamed. And once that one person takes it further, all of a sudden everybody racing can do the same thing, right? That's the power of spending time around people doing things that you didn't know were possible. And it's not enough to just listen to a podcast, because it's easy to disconnect that. It's easy to make those people superhuman. I know you're listening to this show thinking Andy is just really superhuman. I could never do it. I know you're not thinking that, but on other podcasts, when you're listening to them, it's easy to be like, well, it's fine for them, but I can't possibly have that kind of creative practice. But when you're seeing them in the flesh and blood and meat and bones, there's a graphic episode. I need to put the warning. When you see them in the flesh, you can internalize it in a way there's just no other way to take the limits off of your personal beliefs. And you'll just find yourself doing things you didn't know were possible for you if you're spending time with people around that. The second one is just an osmosis. I was reading this article about, it's titled, "To Be Creative, Chinese Philosophy Teaches Us to Abandon Originality." It's a really fascinating article. And it's all about the things that you can't teach with words. And it talks about this person who is using this mallet to perform this very particular technique as he's hammering away, and how there's a way in which he hits it in a soft but hard way at a certain angle with a certain way of holding the mallet. And there's just no way to articulate it, but to just watch it happen and just spend time with it. And be around it. And that kind of osmosis, that's the only way that you can learn so much of the creative life. I believe in podcasts, man. I believe in reading about it. I believe in thinking and getting cerebral with your creativity, but there's a part of it that is intuitive. It's a part of it that's muscle memory. There's a part of it that can only be learned by being in the same place and time as those people. And you know what? Hack it until you can actually get it. Take the videos, listen to the podcast, do all of that. Those will even be breadcrumbs to find those people, people that also are, there's one of my greatest joys of making this podcast is the friendships that have formed between listeners at get-ups, at meetups, at get-togethers, in pep rallies, and online things, like seeing those people connect and those groups forming around the same targets has just been one of the most satisfying things of my creative practice. The third thing is competition. I feel like creators have this knee-jerk reaction against competition, and I get it. There's a dark side, there's an ego side, but there's also a healthy side. When I've been part of a group that were doing amazing things, it just brought out my best. I just wanted to be like, let me try that. Let me see if I can outdo that. There's something you can't get any other way, and I think there's a healthy competition that really comes out with being part of a group. And the last one is just obvious. It's just networking. You're just expanding your network. And I really believe, I've said it a million times, if you can go to art school without going into crazy debt, highly recommend it. And just the number one reason that I just stand by that statement is it's just an essential part of networking. There's a bunch of other ways to do that. So it's not the only way, but that's one of the main things that you get from going to art school is the network that you're buying into. And that there's problematic sides to that. That's a way of gatekeeping. There's definitely some big problems there. But no matter what, whether you're going to go to school for it or whether you're going to go seek these things out for free online, creating your own Zoom room, masterminds, what have you, whatever it is, you can't neglect it. And it's just one of the essential parts of the practice that if you're going to do three things that I would say, if you do these three things, you have a chance at doing something great. You have a chance of really developing a powerful creative practice. If you will make creativity a habit, if you will identify what am I trying to achieve in this season, and if you spend time with other people with the same habit, you are going to get so much further than all of those people that are stuck worrying about the three schools of thought of holding the pencil with the particular type of tension and, overthinking every last detail. So here's some homework, some quick wins, if you will, three things depending on which one. I feel like these are steps. You don't want to identify a target before it's a habit, because that's two goals, making a habit and hitting the target. So, these are really sequential. So depending where you feel like you are in your latest creative endeavor, you either need number one, number two, or number three. Here's your three things. Number one, make a plan to make a habit. Make a goal to set a habit, create a personal project where you have to show up at a particular time and do a particular activity, and don't put any other expectations on it. You can put a constraint of I'm going to draw a character or whatever, but don't make it anything about being good or bad or fast or slow or get this many likes or any of that crap. Just make it a habit. And I would say, do that for 60 times. If you do that thing 60 times, it will become a habit. When I did this podcast, that meant, a year and a bit of podcasting before I started thinking about how do I grow this podcast? Because once you start adding those layers, you go from thinking to overthinking and not doing at all. So that's the number one. Number two is adopt someone else's target. Start there. Number two is, if you don't know, okay, I've got this habit going, but I don't really know how to become better at it. I'm doing it, but I'm not doing it as well as I want to. I need to identify what is my target. For me, storytelling. I told you my target about telling stories that make people say yes to life. I believe stories about moving truth from your head to your heart. Those are big targets for me. But I also have just, in that second season, I could just adopt two of my favorite story people, Brian McDonald and Ira Glass. I integrated, if you will, their separate definitions of story, their separate targets. So Ira Glass said, Brian McDonald said that a story is a series of events that ends in a conclusion. Without a conclusion, it's not a story. It's a list. And he added that was his addition to Webster's definition, which was just a series of events. And then I heard Ira Glass talking to Mike Birbiglia on his podcast and saying that they won't run a story on This American Life if it doesn't end in a surprise. And so for him, a story is a surprise. And so for me, I integrated those, created my own target that said a story to me, my target that I'm trying to hit is a series of events that ends in a surprise. That honestly, it calibrated my creative metal detector as I'm looking for creative gold. When I start thinking about what stories to tell in the podcast, one of the things I think of is just what are surprising things that happen to me. And all of a sudden I have stories bubbling up. Or when I'm creating a fictional story, I start thinking about, how would this be surprising? And I have a bunch of other tools and tricks and stuff in there, but that's a start. And the third thing is the quick win. If you've done that, if you've made a habit, you got to target. This one's just easy, but it's simple, but it's maybe the hardest one, is just sit down and think of somebody, a peer who's trying to hit the same target in their creative habit, and reach out to them, send an email, send a DM, say, hey, do you want to get a virtual coffee? If they're in your town and it's a time when you can meet people in real life, that's even better. But reach out to one person. Take you no time, and it's so easy to forget the magic that happens when those consciousnesses focusing on the same target come together. You're gonna feel the pulse. You're gonna feel like, I've got it again. I found the freaking thread. There's no feeling that I enjoy more in my practice that's more essential, is that finding the thread and finding your people. That's the essential piece to that. So that's a quick win. Sit down, identify one person with a similar target in their creative habit, and send them a message and start that relationship going. I'm going to do the same thing right after this recording. All right, I hope this episode helps you get over thinking. If you're overwhelmed, if you're overthinking, I hope this series not only helps you, if you got friends, creative friends that are stuck and just can't seem to put the pencil to the pad, I hope that this series is something that you'll share with them, because I just making stuff consistently, doing it wrong, making mistakes, making bad stuff, but just continuing to make stuff is the only reason that I've made anything worthwhile. I really believe that. So I hope this super helps. I don't know if you know this, but Creative Pep Talk is part of the Co-Loop Podcast Network. Co-Loop is a network of creative podcasts designed to fuel your creativity. Go check them out, co-podcast.co, and you're going to go see all our shows, tons. It's a gold mine of creative inspiration and insight. I love being a part of this. I love having founded this network, and we're only going up from here, mister. Make sure you never miss an episode of this podcast by signing up to the newsletter, creativepeptalk.com/newsletter. You'll get an email every time we drop a new episode, so you'll never miss one. Plus, you get instant access to the whole back catalog. Do you celebrate the entire back catalog of Creative Pep Talk? If you do, you're going to want episodes 1 through 199. Thanks to Y for our theme music. Thanks to Alex Sugg for our soundtrack. Sophie Pizza, Ryan Appleton for content assistance, and massive thanks to Connor Jones for editing this show so beautifully. Thanks for all tuning in, and until we speak again, stay pepped up. All right.
see what the strike playlist has going. Grenadier. Awesome. I'm going to probably do that on Titan. I think I still got to do. See what's on the Titan. Oh. See if I did my stasis kills. For whatever reason, it's hardest to do on the Titan. Oh, well. Literally have like 1 or 2 more to do. All right. Load into the tower and stop my stream here.